Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Just gone midday, you're with GB News Live. I'm Paul Hawkins. Coming up, the Prime Minister's first major speech of 2023 will come at some point this afternoon, during which he'll unveil his plans for education, including making kids in England study some form of maths until they're 18. But is numeracy the biggest problem facing children in schools? We might also talk about strikes. Today is day 2 of the first 48-hour walkout this week on the railways. Will the government change the law to make it harder for unions to take industrial action? We'll also have the latest figures on the rising cost of your food shop, which hit a record high in December. The increase comes as retail industry bosses warn that high inflation will continue this year amid the fallout from surging energy bills. We'll have the latest from GB News' excellent economics editor, Liam Halligan, who's been drilling into the figures to find out what it means for you and me. And for the first time since 1923, the US Congress has failed to elect a Speaker of the House. Republican leader Kevin McCarthy repeatedly failed to get elected after hardline Conservatives from his own party voted against him, even though he was backed by Donald Trump. We'll try and make some sense of it for you. What does it mean for the Republican Party and Donald Trump's bid to run for the presidency next year? Is fixing kids' math skills the #1 priority for education in this country? Get in touch the usual ways at GB News, GBViews at gbnews.uk. For all that, let's get the latest news with Tamsin.
Paul, thank you, and good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 12. The Prime Minister is to announce plans for all pupils in England to study some form of maths until the age of 18. In his first speech of the year, Rishi Sunak will lay out his priorities for the year ahead, including what he calls reimagining our approach to numeracy. He'll argue letting children into the workplace without maths skills is letting them down, as their future jobs will require more analytical skills. School teacher and maths ambassador Bobby Seagull says there's significant need for increased focus on numeracy.
One of the headline stats that the Prime Minister talked about was that there were 8 million adults in England, that's 1 in 2, that had the numeracy skills that we'd expect from an 11-year-old primary school child. And that's where I think is the key failing. You might have passed an exam at 16, but 10, 12 years down the line, when you get your mortgage bill or you get like a bank statement, do you understand what's going on? So I think it's translating the math skills on paper to real life numeracy application.
Around half of Britain's railway lines are closed, with only a fifth of services running, as 40,000 rail workers strike again today. RMT members across Network Rail and 14 train companies are on day 2 of a 48-hour strike in a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. RMT boss Mick Lynch told GB News the union wants a sensible agreement that everyone can support.
The message is that we do apologise for the inconvenience and we are working towards getting a solution. But there are a lot of people that are frustrated. We've got the health workers, education workers, firefighters are all getting the same treatment from the government, that they seem to want to extend the agony and not give people a square deal. And all we want is a square deal for our members, and then we can create a settlement.
The TUC is calling for an urgent meeting with the Prime Minister in a bid to end the strike sweeping across the country. In a letter to Rishi Sunak, the new TUC General Secretary said ministers should open talks with unions over pay and conditions. Paul Nowak warns public services are in crisis after years of underfunding and understaffing. A British man has been shot dead in St James, Jamaica. Sean Patterson, a personal trainer from West London, was found with gunshot wounds by the pool at the guest house where he was staying on Monday. Local media says a 34-year-old man is now in custody. Food inflation hit a record 13.3% last month due to soaring prices. That's up from 12.4% in the previous month. It comes as the latest price index showed the overall shop price inflation eased slightly to 7.3% in December. The British Retail Consortium says it was a challenging Christmas for many households across the UK. A leading doctor has warned toothbrushes are becoming a luxury item as soaring costs are forcing families to buy food over a toothbrush and toothpaste. In an interview with the British Medical Journal, Dr Camilla Kingdon says the state of children's teeth is alarming evidence of how the cost of living crisis is impacting children's health. Tooth decay is the leading reason for hospital admissions in England among 5 to 9-year-olds. In the US, Republican Kevin McCarthy has failed 3 times in his bid to become the next Speaker of the House of Representatives. Mr McCarthy, who has the backing of former President Trump, failed to get the 218 votes needed after being blocked by 20 hardline members of his party. It's the first time in 100 years the House has failed to elect a Speaker on the first ballot. It's expected to try again later today. Russia's defence ministry has blamed its soldiers' unauthorised mobile phone use for a deadly attack in Ukraine. The comments come after a Ukraine missile strike killed at least 89 Russian troops on New Year's Day in the Moscow-controlled part of the Donetsk region. Several Russian cities have held ceremonies to commemorate the soldiers who died. The British Museum says it's having constructive discussions over the possible return of the Elgin marbles to Greece. The 17 pieces, which make up 30% of the Parthenon sculptures of ancient Greece, were taken by Lord Elgin in the early 19th century. But the 2,500-year-old marbles could soon return to Athens as part of an exchange with the British Museum. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Paul.
Welcome back to GB News Live. It is 7 minutes past 12. Good to have you with us this afternoon. We're going to focus over the next 3 hours on the PM's speech, his first domestic speech of 2023, which he'll set out later this afternoon, talking about his priorities for the year ahead and ambition for a better future for Britain. In it, he'll commit to taking the necessary action to deliver for the long term on issues such as low numeracy rates. As part of this, he'll set a new ambition of ensuring that all school pupils in England study some form of maths to the age of 18. Joining me now is GB News political commentator Tom Harwood. Tom, good to see you. I've got to say, were you surprised to hear that he'll be talking about numeracy, given the priorities appear to be, for a lot of people, the NHS, migrants and industrial action?
Well, this is certainly something that Rishi Sunak has cared about for a long time. In the leadership election, which occurred during last summer, he did talk about ensuring that people should continue with maths until the age of 18, right through their schooling. But I think a lot of people will be thinking this is not the most pressing issue the country faces right now. And I'd be very surprised if, after the speech has concluded, the questions from journalists in that audience, I'd be very surprised if they focused on maths rather than the bigger challenges, perhaps, that the country will be facing. In fact, I'd be very surprised if the Prime Minister didn't also, in this speech, focus on some of those challenges as well.
Yeah, and do we know whether he's going to actually unveil policy on maths, or is it just going to be more about aspiration?
I think we're going to hear some detail towards this. It's interesting that in some of the briefing that we've heard from Number 10, it's been the word some form of maths. So it's unlikely that people will be required to take an A-level right through to the age of 18, perhaps an additional smaller qualification, perhaps maths threaded into other subjects as well, but some form of maths continuing right through to the age of 18 to ensure that numeracy in particular catches up with, frankly, where a lot of East Asian countries are at, and that's our real sort of international competition as a country. But I think so too, because this is his first domestic speech. This is his first big pitch as Prime Minister. He's been in the office for around 10 weeks. And for the first few weeks of his premiership, it's been about firefighting. You speak to people in Number 10, they'll have had the word stability at the forefront of every conversation. They're talking about calming things down before they set their sights on really the challenges and building up a vision. That's potentially what this year will be about. Let's not forget that this is a Prime Minister who, by most counts, is more than 20 points behind in the polls, behind the Labour Party. An extraordinary position to be in. And whilst he has some better personal ratings than his predecessor, the party's ratings are still lower, particularly lower amongst people who might well be minded to vote Conservative, lower in the red wall, lower amongst what might be described as a Conservative base. That simply isn't there, and potentially that needs to be turned around with a clear vision today.
So what do you think the majority of his speech, other than maths, will be made up of?
Well, it's hard to know in particular, but certainly the Prime Minister may want to set out some challenges and particularly perhaps benchmarks, saying what needs to be solved. I'd be very surprised if we didn't hear more about small boats, if we didn't hear about potentially the number one challenge that the Prime Minister has been talking about for the last 10 weeks as well, which is inflation. After all, we know that one of the reasons why the government is being reticent in terms of awarding double-digit pay rises to many sectors is that they really don't want to embed inflation for the long term. They want to bring inflation down. So I'd be very surprised if we didn't hear more about inflation and more about small boats as well.
Yeah, it's all interlinked in some way or another, isn't it? Tom, thanks for that. It's Tom Harwood, our political correspondent. So we're guessing that the Prime Minister will also talk about the current industrial action around the public and private sector. The new General Secretary of the TUC calling for an urgent meeting with the PM in a bid to break the deadlocked industrial disputes sweeping across the country. Paul Novak called for a change in government direction, saying ministers should open negotiations with unions. It comes as rail workers continue a 48-hour strike, with more stoppages planned this month in the transport industry, NHS and civil service. GB News national reporter Ellie Costello is at London Euston Station for us. Ellie, what's it been like there on day 2 of this 48-hour strike?
Yes, good afternoon to you, Paul. There's this familiar sight again in 2023 of picket lines outside stations up and down the country. Outside Euston Station here in London, they have actually just packed up their picket line. But if you walk inside the station, it is eerily quiet. And that is another familiar sense that we're getting. And this has been happening since June 2022. Only a fifth of train services running today. 40,000 RMT members have walked out for the second day of the first 48-hour strike this week. There's another one on Friday and Saturday, and then sandwiched in between that, there's a separate dispute by ASLEF, the train drivers' union. They're walking out tomorrow. So this week, Sunday is the only uninterrupted strike day. But there's even warnings that there is going to be disruption on Sunday as well, because trains, workers, drivers, they're all going to be in the wrong part of the country. So the advice prices. If you are seeking to travel by train, don't do so unless it is absolutely essential. But Paul, there is a glimmer of hope in this dispute, and that is that talks with the government are set to resume on Monday. That's what the boss of the RMT, Mick Lynch, told me this morning.
Our members are backing us, our officers are reporting into us that everything's going well. The employers are telling us that the train service is severely depleted. I mean, that doesn't give us any joy, but that's the point of a dispute and an industrial action, that we try and impact on the companies. We hope that'll have the effect of bringing them back to the table with some proposals that we can develop along with them and the government. And we've got a meeting next Monday with the government, convening a meeting with the employers and ourselves, and we'll see what develops from there. We'll work towards a solution if we can.
So a glimmer of hope there from Mick Lynch, the boss of the RMT. And that follows some positive messaging from the head of Network Rail as well, who says that a deal is within touching distance. So some sort of positivity there. But if you are just hearing this news and you're still feeling pessimistic about it, you can't really be blamed for that either. I mean, this is a dispute that's been going on since June of last year. And fundamentally, at the very crux of this argument, both sides do not agree on issues such as guards on trains and working conditions. So there will have to be movement on both sides in order for a deal to be reached. But Paul, a fresh glimmer of hopes as talks will resume now on Monday.
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. Our West Midlands reporter Jack Carson joins us from Wolverhampton Station now. Jack, what's it like where you are? Are there picket lines? Any passengers around us? Oh, I think I can see one there behind you.
Yeah, there's a picket line behind me. This is the RMT picket line. It's the only picket line here today at the station. In terms of passengers, it's very, very quiet. There's a few people coming in, going out. There's about one train an hour for a lot of the individual local services, some 2 trains per hour going via Birmingham New Street onto London Euston. So there are some local services still running. Some of the mainline operators of Anti-West Coast, Cross Country, they are running a very disrupted service. They actually stopped selling tickets for the trains running on the days of industrial action, telling people only travel if absolutely necessary. And so these passengers are having to find alternative ways to travel here, whether it's by bus or whether it's by trams. Here in the West Midlands, there's the tram network going all the way here from Wolverhampton to Birmingham New Street. So a lot of people are getting to work. Yesterday I was speaking to one person who said even though it took him an extra 40 minutes, he was on the tram, but it was absolutely rammed. So people here in the West Midlands finding alternative ways to travel. In terms of where this ends, speaking to a few of the people on the picket line behind me, it's not just about pay that they're bothered about. Of course, that's an issue for the RMT and for union members. Of course, we know from Network Rail they offered a 5% backdated pay rise for 2022 and a 4% pay rise for 2023. That was rejected by 55% of the members. So pay is an issue, but a lot of them, as Ellie was just saying, is terms and conditions. Things like removing guards from trains, driver-only trains, ticket booths being removed from stations across the country. These are red lines for Mick Lynch that he's not going to negotiate on. Network Rail saying they believe a deal is close. They're obviously meeting with the government and RMT later on next week. So where the wiggle room that RMT that the Network Rail have found, we'll have to see what that is. In terms of what the RMT want, of course we know those red lines on terms and conditions. They've not publicly stated what their kind of a desire is for pay. We assume somewhere close to inflation, but the government saying that that's just not possible. So they're going to have to come to the table together on Monday. They're going to have to try and negotiate the way out of this industrial action, because Mick Lynch also said that he's well prepared to carry on this industrial action for the next 5 months.
Yeah, indeed. Jack, good to see you in Wolverhampton. Thank you for that, Jack Carson, our West Midlands reporter. Let's speak now to trade unionist Jerry Hicks, who joins us on GB News Live. Jerry, good to see you. Clearly there's a gap, but if we just focus on the rail dispute for a second, clearly there's a gap between the two sides on the fundamentals, but at least they're getting around the table and talking.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think they've been forced to talk. I think the Tory government and the Tory ministers have miscalculated. They thought they'd isolate the rail workers. They thought they'd demonise them. Even on your own Twitter feed, I saw a couple of minutes ago, 3 rail passengers being interviewed. 2 of them supported the strike. That's 66%. But they haven't isolated them. Enough's enough. There's postal workers, university workers, border control, health workers, paramedics. We've tightened our belts since 2010. It's so tight now you can't breathe. And yet there's more multimillionaires now than ever before. Enough's enough. And these strikes are popular in the main. People understand because they're suffering themselves.
Yeah, how much longer do you think, in the case of the railway strikes, how much longer can unions like the RMT continue to strike for, given their members have already lost almost 3 weeks' pay?
Well, I think they have voted twice to continue the strike or to take the strike. They voted to reject the deal. I think most people, I know I did, you try and make contingency plans. You cut your cloth to suit. You're prepared to be out for as long as it takes. My feeling is, though, that we are coming to the end game because the Tories are, they've lost the plot, if indeed they ever had the plot. There should be a minister for space cadets because they're so distant from reality, it's unbelievable. And you've just reported that there's talks resuming Monday. I think if the Tory government hadn't intervened, we would have had a deal already by now.
Yeah, but there has been an improvement in the situation. At the start of the railway dispute, the government wouldn't even sit around the table with the unions, and they have now come round, although there has been a change of Prime Minister and a change of administration. We can't... I mean, the government has a responsibility to look after the public purse, and it can't afford to give everyone the pay rise they want. For example, with nurses who are looking for 19%, that's simply not feasible.
Well, you say that. The small wonder Rishi Sunak's concentrating on numeracy today. We've had more Tory prime ministers than we've probably had strike days, and we've wasted billions during the pandemic on bogus PPE and the likes. I think the truth is, especially with the nurses, 2 years ago we clapped them, Boris Johnson included, Rishi Sunak included, when they risked their lives to save our lives. 2 years on, by the way, we're clapping them again. There's horns up and down the country tooting because they support the nurses and their strike. There's plenty of money in this country. There is energy companies making an absolute mint. There are nuclear power stations being built that needn't be. Every house that faces south should have a solar panel. And then you wouldn't even need these nuclear power stations. There are people so rich they buy football clubs just for a laugh. What's that all about? There's people so rich they build rockets to go into outer space, presumably to meet the Tory Minister for Space Cadets. We are awash with money in this country. That's the truth. And companies pay healthy dividends to their shareholders. The nurses deserve it. They should get it. The rail workers deserve it. They should get it. The postal workers. Everybody knows they're posty. If you don't know them by name, you nod to them and you say hello.
Listen,
you can't demonise people. We are the postie. We are the nurse. We are the university worker. If it's not
OK,
us,
Jerry, we get the point, Jerry. We're going to have to leave it there. But listen, thanks for speaking to us. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much, trade unionist Jerry Hicks there. And, of course, a lot of people asking for pay rises because inflation is going up. And that's what we're going to be talking about next on GB News Live. Fresh food prices rose at record rates last month, with food inflation showing little signs of improvement. Our economics and business editor will be breaking down those figures for us. Before that, let's just take a quick break.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. It is 12:24. Let's return to our top story this lunchtime. The PM's bid to ensure school children learn maths until the age of 18. He's making a speech this afternoon in East London. We will bring that to you when he starts speaking. But in the meantime, let's turn to someone who has written a maths-based book, Wonders Beyond Numbers, and is famous for his science-based TV show, Think of a Number. And, of course, Johnny Ball reveals all. He is a TV legend. It's a pleasure to talk to you, Johnny. Thanks for speaking to us this afternoon. First of all, just tell us...
Great pleasure.
First of all, what do you make of Rishi Sunak's plan to get more kids learning maths right up until they're 18? Is it a good idea?
You've got to make maths interesting and something they want to learn. People can always learn what they want to learn. And if they don't get the germ to want to learn, then you're wasting your time anyway. So what you've got to do from the very start is make maths more interesting right from primary school through. Now, lots of people have done this in the past. There's Harold Jacobs, Mathematics, a Human Endeavour, the American, and there's Martin Gardner, another American, and his books inspired me and absolutely switched me on. I've got a row of books, 6 feet long on my shelves, of maths books and books that make maths interesting. And I would willingly have studied maths up to 18, but not the curriculum. I wouldn't want to study the curriculum today because the curriculum is mundane, it lacks spark, it lacks interest, it lacks the ability to hook the student, and that's what you have to do, hook the student onto maths.
So it's not so much about teaching them till they're 18, you're saying it's the way we teach it that needs to change?
Precisely. You see, each minister comes on, education minister, they say, we'll get better results. How will we do it? We'll trim the curriculum. And that way, if we trim the curriculum, then we'll get better results. So since the 1950s, we're talking 70-odd years, they've been trimming the curriculum until it's so thinner now that a 1950s, 1960s A-level student would be horrified at what's being taught today. It is so thin, it's so uninspiring. Now, all the books on my shelves were written by people who were inspiring about maths because they love maths. Very often they were magicians. Very often they love card tricks. They love all kinds of ways of enjoying maths and making it fun. And that's the way to do it. And that's what I still go to schools today. I still go to my theatre show, Wonders Beyond Numbers, because I try to do that. And that's the essence. Once a kid is inspired and want to know more about any subject, then you can teach that subject no problem at all. But once they dig their feet in and say, I'm not keen on this, I don't want to learn this anymore, you've lost them. You will not get through to them.
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt you, Johnny, because just time is short, but he also says that he wants a form of maths. Now, I'm assuming he's talking about trigonometry or geometry or algebra or arithmetic. What would be the best form of, the most important form of maths that we should be teaching?
Maths that's enjoyable, maths that's fun, maths that inspires you, and maths that really helps you to understand the world. You know, the oldest Greek mathematician, Thales, 2,500 years ago, he not only discovered how to easily measure the height of a pyramid, the Great Pyramid, in fact, but he also questioned how far the horizon was. And from the maths of sorting that out, for instance, if your eyes are you're on the beach and your eyes are 2 meters above the waterline, then you can see 5 kilometers. But to see 10 kilometers, you need to be 2 times 2 or 4 times as high. And he realized that. And that is the maths today we need to put a satellite in orbit. So that's a maths he discovered 2,500 years ago, which is powerful today. And it's that kind of story, that kind of link you need to really inspire people into following mathematics.
Yeah, but it sounds quite glamorous when you're giving that kind of explanation using space and the stars and stuff. But when you want to kind of try and put a bench together for your kid, it doesn't seem quite so glamorous. Then you've got to do the measurements.
Yes, you have, but there are fun. This chap here, Harold Jacobs, the American, he wrote 3 books, but his title, Mathematics, A Human Endeavour. He says, it's a human endeavour. We want to be mathematicians. We're the only species that want to be mathematicians. And so on every page, there is a new idea and a cartoon, something to enliven it, something to make it exciting. And that's the way he worked with 3 glorious books.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Johnny. Thank you so much. I watched you growing up. It was brilliant, and you inspired me to try and follow maths, and I was still rubbish, but I was inspired nonetheless. Thank you.
Well, I'm still at it. OK, take care.
Still going. Thanks, Johnny. Cheers. That is Johnny Ball from Johnny Ball Reveals All, one of my childhood heroes. Good to speak to him. It's GB News Live. It is 12:30. We're speaking to our economics editor, Liam Halligan, in a moment. Speaking of figures, to get the latest numbers on food inflation. But in the meantime, let's just bring you up to date with the latest headlines with Tamsin.
Paul, thanks very much. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. It's 12:30. The Prime Minister is to announce plans for all pupils in England to study some form of maths until the age of 18. In his first speech of 2023, Rishi Sunak will lay out his priorities for the year ahead, including what he calls reimagining our approach to numeracy. He'll argue letting children into the workplace without maths skills is letting them down, as their future jobs will require more analytical skills. Schoolteacher and maths ambassador Bobby Segal says there's a significant need for increased focus on maths.
One of the headline stats that the Prime Minister talked about was that there were 8 million adults in England, that's 1 in 2, that had the numeracy skills that we'd expect from an 11-year-old primary school child. And that's where I think is the key failing. You might have passed an exam at 16, but 10, 12 years down the line, when you get your mortgage bill or you get like a bank statement, do you understand what's going on? So I think it's translating the math skills on paper to real-life numeracy application.
Around half of Britain's railway lines are closed, with only a fifth of services running, as 40,000 rail workers strike again today. RMT members across Network Rail and 14 train companies are on day 2 of a 48-hour strike in a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. Food inflation hit a record 13.3% last month due to soaring prices. That's up from 12.4% in the previous month. It comes as the latest price index showed the overall shop price inflation eased slightly to 7.3% in December. A leading doctor has warned toothbrushes are becoming a luxury item, as soaring costs are forcing families to buy food over a toothbrush and toothpaste. In an interview with the British Medical Journal, Dr. Camilla Kingdon says the state of children's teeth is alarming evidence of how the cost of living crisis is impacting children's health. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
It is 12:35, GB News Live. Good to have you with us this afternoon. We're going to talk about inflation now, which shows no immediate signs of waning. That's according to the British Retail Consortium's chief executive, as food prices remain close to 40-year highs. New figures show a rise to 13.3% last month as many cash-strapped households struggled with high costs over Christmas. And fresh food prices saw the biggest rise, marking its highest monthly inflation rate since records began back in 2005. Joining me now to break it all down is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, who's on the money. Liam, how bad are these figures?
Happy New Year, Paul, firstly. Good to see you there talking to Johnny Ball. I think it's pretty strange that Sunak's talking about maths when there's so much else going on. I mean, I was a mathematician undergrad, did the A-level, I'm a governor of 2 schools. I'm all for maths. But when lots of people are worrying about making ends meet and their electricity bill and can their kids buy a house or even rent a house or even find anywhere to live, I'm surprised. Anyway, we'll see what he says at 2 p.m.
Yeah, it is a weird one, I do agree.
It is a weird one. It looks slightly out of touch to me, but hey, what do I know? I do think these inflation numbers are interesting. These aren't official inflation numbers out today from the Office for National Statistics. They're from the British Retail Consortium, as you said. And I've put the figures up here on a graphic, and GB News radio listeners will have to take my word for it. We saw fresh food inflation of 14.3% in November. Food inflation was 13.3. Fresh food inflation was 14.3. So in November, Paul, on average, fresh food was 14.3% more expensive than it was in November 2021. In December, that number rose to 15%, and that is the highest on record. Now, in November, the official CPI inflation number, that's Consumer Price Index, that's all inflation across the board, all kinds of goods and services, that was 10.7%. You see the difference there. Food prices are going up much more. The December CPI number, we don't know that. The official number, that will come out on January the 18th.
Yeah, so that figure, that CPI inflation figure in November, 10.7%, is that being driven by food inflation? Is food inflation driving this?
Food inflation is a big part of the inflation story, but as I've said on GB News, for the whole of the last 12 months and more, inflation that's experienced by poorer households who disproportionately spend heavily on their food, on their housing, it's much higher than the headline CPI Consumer Price Index number. If you say to a lot of GB News viewers and listeners that the cost of living is only 10% more than this time last year, they'll think it's a sick joke, right? Because for their households, many of them, it's often 20 or 30% more. Just another little interesting aside. In the run-up to Christmas, I've got some more numbers here about the supermarkets. In the run-up to Christmas, we did have a bigger Christmas than in 2021, because this was our first COVID-free Christmas, albeit there was lots of industrial action. Sales for Aldi, one of the big discount supermarkets, German-owned, were up 27% by value compared to the 3 months ahead of Christmas 2021. These are the 3 months ahead of Christmas.
Like for like.
Yeah, like for like. Lidl, the other big discounter in the supermarket industry in Britain, their sales are up almost 24%. So these cheaper, they would say good value, still high quality, discount supermarkets, well, people go for a bargain. They often have loss leader items. You can buy your milk and bread really cheap. They may even lose money on that. And that gets you in the store to spend more on other things. Compare that to the traditional mid-market giants, Tesco there, the biggest retailer in Britain still. Their sales are up to 6.5%. Sainsbury's were up by 6%. So what's going on here, Paul, in the supermarket industry is a shift towards the discounters and away from the traditional mid-market. I put all four of them up there to show that even the mid-market, more expensive, even Ocado, Waitrose, as it were, that was up by 8%. So it's not like people at the higher end weren't spending more than 2021, the 3 months before Christmas 2021. They were, but they were spending disproportionately more at the discount supermarket change. So what's happening here, as food price inflation is so high, people are voting with their feet and they are moving away from the mid-market and the upper market chains to the discounting chains.
Yeah, and from memory, supermarkets like Aldi and Lidl, the lower end, they operate on margins of 2 to 3%, and Sainsbury's and Tesco, something like 3 to 4%. So essentially, the only way that it seems that the traditional supermarkets can respond is by squeezing their margins even further.
Now,
They've got a bit more
that's a good buy them high, stack them high, sell them cheap. That's what Sam Walmart said in America, and that's what the discounters are trying to do here. And, you use the phrase lower end because it is the lower end of the income spectrum. But these are very sophisticated businesses and they would severely reprimand journalists for saying that they're some kind of, lower quality store. What they're trying to do is value with lower margins, as you say, but they can make more money overall if they increase their volume. Look, don't get me wrong, Tesco and Sainsbury's still dominate UK food retailing. They've still got a much bigger market share than Aldi and Lidl, though Aldi and Lidl are eating into that market share as the discerning British shopper votes with their feet. And it is literally with their feet because, of course, Aldi and Lidl, their retail offering is much less of what they do than the sort of more middle-class supermarkets where, particularly Ocado with Waitrose, the links between those stores historically. So there is a really interesting change going on. The shape of our food retailing industry is shifting as prices are putting households under pressure up and down the income spectrum.
Yeah, and just very quickly, petrol has fallen in price quite a lot over the past month. Will it continue that trend?
Well, I was tweeting about this over the Christmas holiday, getting thousands of retweets on my Twitter account at Liam Halligan, because I was monitoring, look, this is what wholesale gas prices are doing, this is what oil prices are doing. Hang on to your hat, Paul, because wholesale gas prices and oil prices globally are lower now than they were when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine in February 2022.
But that'll take a while to feed through.
But, of course, diesel prices are 20-25% more at the forecourt. Petrol prices are also much higher than they were in the early part of 2022. And we all know what's happened to electricity bills.
Yeah.
The big, the big petrol retailers, the energy companies, they all say, oh, we buy our energy on, forward markets and with a delay and all the rest of it. But it's always interesting. When oil prices go up, for instance, prices at the forecourt go up like a rocket. When oil prices come down, as we say,
always
like
the
a
way,
feather.
like a feather,
Up
yeah.
like a rocket,
Always
down
the
like
way.
a feather.
Always
I wonder why
the
that
way.
is.
Yeah, I wonder why that is, yeah. Liam, good to see you. Thank you so much. That's our excellent business and economics editor, Liam Halligan. By the way, if you want to get in touch with us about anything you're listening to or watching on the programme this afternoon, gbviews@gbnews.uk. It is 12:42. The Health Secretary has blamed high numbers of flu cases, COVID-19 and Strep A fears for the particular pressures the NHS faced over Christmas. Stephen Barclay's comments come as senior doctors say the NHS is on a knife edge, with many A&E units struggling to keep up with demand and trusts and ambulance services declaring critical incidents, with GPs also saying they are facing massive pressures mirroring those across the health system. Let's speak now to NHS GP Dr Sarah Kaya. Good to see you, Dr Sarah Kaya. First of all, do you agree with Stephen Barclay's assessment?
Look, I think there's a perfect storm at the moment. So we've got increased flu numbers. It's 7 times higher now than it was last month. We've got increased number of COVID cases, 9,500 this week compared to 4,500 a few weeks ago. We've got, lower numbers of staff available to us, not only because of COVID, but because of the numbers coming down. And meanwhile, we are about to have more strikes with the nurses and some more ambulance strikes. So I think it's an absolute perfect storm of disaster. It's intolerable, it's unsustainable, and at the moment it doesn't look like it's going to be relenting.
What would you like to hear from Rishi Sunak when he speaks this afternoon? He's making this big speech about priorities for 2023. We know he's going to talk about maths, but what would you like to hear him say about the NHS?
I mean, I'm sure maths is important, but evidently the NHS is significantly more important. I think supporting the nurses on their requests for why they're striking might be a good place to start, because we need them. We need the ambulance staff. We now know this. We've known this for a long time, but it doesn't seem clear to them. I think it's also important to put more funding towards maintaining our staff, so our doctors as well. We lost so many doctors due to Brexit, and I think it's really important that we try and retain as many as we can at the moment, and making the environment in the working hospitals and in general practices more tolerable for people to stay. I think all of these things will then help patients and improve patient safety, which is our absolute priority.
Yeah, I think no one thinks that nurses shouldn't get a pay rise, but 19% feels like a lot.
I think there must be there must be a common denominator so that both parties can find a way to get through this. I'm by no means, economically or politically, empowered in this kind of area, but I do recognise the work that the nurses put in. I wouldn't be able to do their work. So I do think that they should be given something more than they have.
Yeah, and what's the way to clear backlogs when it comes to... I mean, there's a backlog for a lot of things, ambulances, operations. How would you like to see that cleared?
Well, we know that part of the backlog is because we don't have the staff to actually complete the work. And so I think we need to get more people through medical school. We need to make it a more enticing job for people.
But that does take time. And Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, has said, maybe we should use the private care sector to try and clear that backlog in the short term.
Yes, I see that. Absolutely. There will be a lot of private doctors that will also have time to be able to help there. But the concerns there will be people will start worrying about the NHS becoming privatised in that manner. So I think there need to be very strict boundaries to ensure that it does still seem that the NHS is a national rather than a privatised service.
Yeah. Good to get your thoughts this afternoon. Thank you. That's Dr Sarah Kyatt there. With Rishi Sunak due to speak this afternoon, and we will, of course, bring it to you here on GB News Live when it happens. One issue he will need to address is the constant strike action. Now, this comes as the chief negotiator of Network Rail has raised hopes that an end to rail strikes is on the horizon, saying a deal with the RMT is now within touching distance. It comes as the country enters a second day of widespread strike action, with 3 more on the way. Our national reporter Eddie Costello has been looking at the knock-on impact of the worst rail strikes in 30 years.
We're halfway into the first week of 2023, but already a familiar sight of strike action. Yet again, Britain has been left with a skeleton service on the rails, the biggest national strike in 30 years. This week presents 5 days of travel chaos. It starts with the RMT's 48-hour strike on Tuesday and Wednesday, as left the Train Drivers Union walkout on Thursday, and a second 48-hour walkout by the RMT will come on Friday and Saturday. Today marks the 21st day of action by the RMT since June of last year. So, how are the British public feeling?
Yeah, well, I manoeuvre my way around. I got caught out last week, and I'm making sure I don't get caught out this time. I have a strategy in place.
Do you agree with the reason why they're striking, or?
Wholeheartedly.
It's going to be very inconvenient, so, and it's hurting the people. It's actually, I don't see the point. So there's other ways of trying to, get your point across, I think, rather than, hurt the people that use the services.
I definitely support the rail strikes. I support anybody striking for a better pay.
It's a blame game. Both sides say they are willing to negotiate, but there's no public sign of these talks actually taking place.
Get off the picket line, round the negotiating table, and let's get these damaging strikes to an end. There's a fair and reasonable payoff on the table for the people you represent, Mick, so let's get round the table and let's see if we can get the dispute sorted out.
If there's an invite, we'll be there today, tomorrow, or whenever it is that they want to get there, but there has to be a change. We've been hearing the same stuff for 6 months or more, that they want to facilitate a settlement. Well, they've got to prove that now.
It's estimated the rail strikes have cost bars, pubs, restaurants and hotels in the UK at least £1.5 billion in December alone.
It is a hugely challenging time for them, and for those that are in city centres, the rail strikes are undoubtedly hammering a final nail into their coffin as they see a big loss of revenue. They are the collateral damage of these rail strikes. It's unlikely that the strikes themselves will put them out of business, but that perfect storm of a cost of doing business crisis, soaring energy bills, food price inflation, wage rate inflation, and a cost of living crisis with a consumer downturn means that the businesses in the middle are struggling to survive. We've lost 2,500 over the last quarter. We anticipate we'll lose as many again in the forthcoming quarter.
The Nighttime Industries Association estimates that its members lost £2 billion in the month of December, usually a key time for the hospitality sector to gain revenue. They will now struggle to survive through a traditionally quieter month of the year.
Yeah, it's a really difficult time for the hospitality industry. I was at Euston yesterday and one pub said to me that they'd lost 250 grand, had to lay off 15 staff in December because of the strike. So not helping the situation there when it comes to hospitality or the wider economy. But GBViews at gbnews.uk if you want to feed back to us on that one. We're going to go to the United States next, where the Republicans have been plunged into chaos as hardline members have repeatedly blocked their own leader from becoming the new House of Representatives Speaker. They had planned to replace Democrat Speaker Nancy Pelosi with party leader Kevin McCarthy. However, the process was complicated as a group of right-wing Republicans put forward their own candidate, Jim Jordan, meaning yesterday, for the first time in 100 years, a nominee for House Speaker failed to be appointed on the first vote. Well, joining me now is in the studio is Greg Swenson, Chair of Republicans Overseas UK. Greg, good to see you.
Good to be here.
So Kevin McCarthy, right? First of all, who is he, and why does it matter that he wasn't nominated as Speaker for the House of Representatives? And this is meant to be a great time for the Republicans, right?
Sure.
You won back the lower house of Congress.
Yeah, so you'd think there'd be more unity. The voters have made a statement that they want, the Republicans in the House to stop the insanity in Washington. And yet you have these now 20 sort of rogue Republicans that are blocking his nomination. So it's important. Kevin McCarthy is currently the minority, or prior to the election, or prior to the swearing in this week, hopefully this week, he was the Republican minority leader. But he's never been the Speaker of the House. And it's very difficult for a first-time Speaker to win the support of, getting at least 218 votes when he has such a slim majority. Typically, first-time speakers have greater than 230 seats. So there's some sort of inside baseball complications. He is polling, within the Republican Party at net plus 30, which is good. Newt Gingrich, who was probably the most famous Republican speaker in the last, half century, or last 100 years even, was only at plus 24. So, there's some headwinds against him. but the tailwinds are greater, and I would hope that these Republicans would come around. And also, they don't have an alternative, right? In 2015, when McCarthy didn't quite get the support he needed, Paul Ryan was in the rings, who was a vice presidential candidate and very well liked in the Republican Party, you know, plus 48 ratings. So, you know, there is no Paul Ryan. And the person they put up, you know, another Ryan, you know, he doesn't, you know, good guy, and I agree with him quite often, but he doesn't have the majority support that he would need, first of all. And secondly, he's endorsed McCarthy. He did a great speech in the House yesterday.
Yeah.
So
just very quickly, why do you need the House Speaker to be nominated in order to enact business?
Right. So even though the Republicans have the majority, they don't. It doesn't really mean anything if the Speaker isn't there as the Speaker of the House, and he's, you know, the person that sits behind, or he or she is the person that sits behind the president when he makes speeches to the joint sessions. You know, it's a very powerful role. It's, you know, it's the legislative branch, and so the
so they can't pass laws.
They can't pass laws without a credible
that's a big problem.
Speaker, and I think it will work out. There's a good chance that they give up on him and find someone else, and it could be, you know, Steve Scalise, I think would be suitable, but it's not going to be, you know, someone from the fringe, which are these 5 or 10, you know, fringe Republicans, and Nancy Pelosi, remember, she had the same majority, only 222 seats when she was Speaker the last time. But she was an incumbent Speaker. She'd been Speaker once before, and she was able to handle her fringe element, you know, the squad. You know, she was able to manage them. They talked a lot,
and the Republican
Party never got anything done.
Yeah, and the Republican Party is a different beast. It's quite split at the moment, isn't it? And so when you have a tiny majority, it only takes a few people to vote against you.
It only takes a few, because it's not really that split. It's just 5 or 10. You know, Republicans, and then it's grown to 20, but not because they don't like McCarthy. I mean, half of them voted for McCarthy in the first ballot, but I think they're seeing some cracks, so they just figure, all right, we need to get someone else in there.
Right, but why would hardline Conservatives vote against McCarthy, given McCarthy was backed by Donald Trump?
It just doesn't make sense. Both Trump and McCarthy, I mean, and Senate Majority Leader McConnell have endorsed him. That's like cats and dogs endorsing the same candidate. It makes no sense. And again, it's because they don't have an alternative. If they had an alternative, okay, great. If it was split more 50-50 or 60-40, but it's, you know, it's over 200 that voted for McCarthy and only ultimately 20 that didn't. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, and I think they're digging their own grave in many ways. It's a self-inflicted wound. That, you know, they were elected to get things done and stop the insanity of the Biden administration. They can't do it unless there's unity. And Mrs. Pelosi did that well with her party in the last 2 years. And I think Kevin McCarthy's the right person to do that.
We'll just have to see, hopefully, if he gets nominated or not. Difficult time for the Republican Party. Really appreciate your time, Greg. Thank you so much. Greg Spencer there from Republicans overseas. Just before we go, lots of you getting in touch with us about Rishi Sunak's speech, which is coming this afternoon on GB News Live. Sunak must have had a meltdown, says Jackie. Maths is not an issue. He is insane. He's hiding. Someone needs to drag him out from underneath his bed. We'll have more coming up after this.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here with the latest forecast from the Met Office. Drier for many today, but not for all. There is still some rain around and a strong wind, although that wind keeping things mild. It was a mild start to the day, especially in the south, and we've still got a lot of cloud across the UK, but a better chance of some breaks developing East Wales into the Midlands, East Anglia, North East Scotland as well. Now for North West Scotland as well as for Wales, there'll be some showers, but Northern Ireland, Southern Scotland and Northern England seeing the bulk of the rain through the day. However, everywhere is going to be mild, certainly milder for northern Scotland compared with recent days. Temperatures back to around average here, above average across the rest of the UK, 13 or 14 Celsius in the south. And those temperatures stay up overnight, along with this brisk breeze, although the wind does tend to ease during the hours of darkness. And the rain also eventually disappears overnight, with clear spells developing. Touch of frost for northeast Scotland, but elsewhere, it's a mild start to Thursday. A dry start initially for many, but these weather fronts are coming along. The warm front initially will be a weak feature. The cold front bringing more rain. For most places, that will be later in the day on Thursday. So we start the day with the cloud thickening in the west, some outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Much of this pushing northeastwards during the morning, and some places will miss it entirely. It's a very showery feature. However, for Scotland and Northern Ireland, here the rain turns heavier and more persistent later in the day, especially for western areas. And with a wind once again from the southwest, it's a mild day. 14 Celsius in London, 8 to 9 Celsius for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But it is a wet end to the day for Scotland and Northern Ireland. The wind picking up as well as this rain pushes through. And it's really during the hours of darkness again across England and Wales where we see the rain move through. And then it turns very windy overnight for Scotland in particular. Gales or even severe gales for the northwest. Saturday and Sunday, blustery with showers.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
It's 1 o'clock, you're with GB News Live, I'm Paul Hawkins. Coming up this afternoon, the PM will make his first major speech of 2023. Education will be on the agenda as he unveils his plans to make kids in England study some form of maths until they're 18. But is numeracy the biggest problem facing children in schools? With rail workers on day two of yet another 48-hour walkout, could strikes and what to do about them also feature in Sunak's speech. And 4 days into 2023, how's your New Year's resolutions going? Still going strong? Have you thrown in the towel already? We'll also have the latest figures on the rising cost of your food shop, which hit a record high in December. GB News economics editor Liam Halligan has been drilling into the figures to find out what it means for you. And I really want to know what you think. So get in touch with us on the programme and anything you hear. Should Rishi Sunak be talking about maths, or should he be focusing more on migrants and the NHS? GB Views at gbnews.uk. Before that, let's bring you up to date with the latest news headlines with Tams.
Paul, thanks very much and good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 1. In just over an hour, the Prime Minister will announce plans for all pupils in England to study some form of maths until the age of 18. In his first speech of 2023, Rishi Sunak will lay out his priorities for the year ahead, including what he calls reimagining our approach to numeracy. He'll argue letting children into the workplace without maths skills is letting them down, as their future jobs will require more analytical skills. Schoolteacher and maths ambassador Bobby Seagull says more focus on numeracy is needed.
One of the headline stats that the Prime Minister talked about was that there were 8 million adults in England, that's 1 in 2, that had the numeracy skills that we'd expect from an 11-year-old primary school child. And that's where I think is the key failing. You might have passed an exam at 16, but 10, 12 years down the line, when you get your mortgage bill or you get like a bank statement, do you understand what's going on? So I think it's translating the math skills on paper to real-life numeracy application.
Around half of Britain's railway lines are closed, with only a fifth of services running, as 40,000 rail workers strike again today. RMT members across Network Rail and 14 train companies are on day 2 of a 48-hour strike in a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. RMT boss Mick Lynch told GB News the union wants a sensible agreement that everyone can support.
The message is that we do apologise for the inconvenience and we are working towards getting a solution. But there are a lot of people that are frustrated. We've got the health workers, education workers, firefighters are all getting the same treatment from the government, that they seem to want to extend the agony and not give people a square deal. And all we want is a square deal for our members, and then we can create a settlement.
A British man has been shot dead in St James in Jamaica. Sean Patterson, a personal trainer from West London, was found with gunshot wounds by the pool at the guest house where he was staying on Monday. Local media says a 34-year-old man is now in custody. Supermarket Sainsbury's has announced it's to increase wages for nearly 127,000 workers from February. Workers of both Sainsbury's and Argos will see increases from £10.25 to £11 outside of London. Staff inside the capital will increase to nearly £12. The group said the measures were to help retain existing and attract new employees in a tight labour market. Food inflation hit a record 13.3% last month due to soaring prices. That's up from 12.4% in the previous month. It comes as the latest price index showed the overall shop price inflation eased slightly to 7.3% in December. The British Retail Consortium says it was a challenging Christmas for many households across the UK. An environmental campaign group says it will take legal action against the government for allowing a new coal mine in Cumbria to be built. Friends of the Earth has said the fossil fuel extraction project is an unnecessary spend on the UK economy. It also claims the government has acted unlawfully by failing to account for the climate impacts of building the mine. To the US now, and Republican Kevin McCarthy has failed 3 times in his bid to become the next Speaker of the House of Representatives. Mr. McCarthy, who has the backing of former President Trump, failed to get the 218 votes needed after being blocked by 20 hardline members of his party. It's the first time in 100 years the House has failed to elect a Speaker on the first ballot. It's expected to try again later today. Russia's defence ministry has blamed its soldiers' unauthorised mobile phone use for a deadly attack in Ukraine. The comments come after a Ukrainian missile strike killed at least 89 Russian troops on New Year's Day in the Moscow-controlled part of the Donetsk region. Several Russian cities have held ceremonies to commemorate the soldiers who died. The British Museum says it's having constructive discussions over the possible return of the Elgin marbles to Greece. The 17 pieces, which make up 30% of the Parthenon sculptures of ancient Greece, were taken by Lord Elgin in the early 19th century. But the 2,500-year-old marbles could soon return to Athens as part of an exchange with the British Museum. This is GB News. More from me soon. Now it's back to Paul.
Welcome back to GB News Live. We will bring you the PM's speech when it starts within the hour. He is set to announce plans for all pupils in England to study some form of maths until the age of 2018. It's his first speech of 2023. He's going to outline his vision for reimagining our approach to numeracy. We do know he'll argue letting children into the workplace without math skills is letting them down, as children's future jobs will require more analytical skills. Joining me now is political editor at the Huffington Post, Kevin Schofield. Good to see you, Kevin. Looking at what may be in his speech, we do know that maths will feature, but there is also a migrant crisis, industrial action crisis and an NHS crisis. Is maths the most important thing?
No, it's not obviously the most important thing. I mean, basically what's happened here is that they have trailed a line from it, which is the maths line, into today. They've given that out to the media under embargo. But I think the main thrust of the speech itself actually will address things like the NHS, immigration and the economy. So I think he was basically keeping his powder dry overnight so that he's got something fresh to say. So yeah, we haven't got long to wait. But as I say, I think we will get more of the Prime Minister's thinking after 2 o'clock as to what he's going to do about the NHS in particular, as well as the economy. And as I say, the boats crisis in the English Channel.
Yeah, what are you hearing from your readers about what should be the number one priority for the Prime Minister?
Well, I mean, I've been speaking to quite a few Conservative MPs over Christmas and New Year as to what they think Rishi Sunak's priorities should be over the next 12 months. And I think what they're saying is what a lot of voters are saying is it is the NHS, immigration and the economy. Those are the 3 big ticket items, I think, on the political agenda. Those are the things that Tory MPs, I think, are hearing from their constituents that they want the government to act on. And
and let's wait and see.
In those areas.
Sorry, Kevin, we just lost you for a second. You did a very good impression of a robot freezing. But please continue.
Yeah, we're just saying that Conservative MPs basically are picking up from their constituents. They want progress to be made over the next 12 months on those 3 big ticket items: NHS, immigration and the economy. And I think those are the areas that Rishi Sunak will be judged on.
Yeah, and he says he's going to make himself personally responsible for the NHS. He's going to nail his own personal responsibility to what happens with the NHS, and that's a big political risk for him in a way.
Well, absolutely. He is then associated with failure, if indeed it is failure, you know. So if he puts his name to it, then he's the guy basically who will carry the can ultimately come the next general election. So yeah, it's all well and good Rishi Sunak saying that he will take personal charge of it, but it means that he's got nowhere to run if things don't improve. He's already, you know, set a very high bar in terms of the small boats coming over.
OK, he's frozen again, so we're going to leave him to thaw out, I think. That is Kevin Schofield from the Huffington Post. It is 10 minutes past 1 now with Rishi Sunak due to speak this afternoon. One issue he will need to address is the constant strike action. This comes as the chief negotiator of Network Rail has raised hopes that an end to rail strikes is on the horizon, saying a deal with the RMT is now within touching distance. It comes as the country enters a second day of widespread strike action with 3 more on the way. Our national reporter Ellie Costello has been looking at the knock-on impact of the worst rail strikes in 30 years.
We're halfway into the first week of 2023, but already a familiar sight of strike action. Yet again, Britain has been left with a skeleton service on the rails, the biggest national strike in 30 years. This week presents 5 days of travel chaos. It starts with the RMT's 48-hour strike on Tuesday and Wednesday, as left the Train Drivers Union walkout on Thursday, and a second 48-hour walkout by the RMT will come on Friday and Saturday. Today marks the 21st day of action by the RMT since June of last year. So, how are the British public feeling?
Yeah, well, I manoeuvre my way around. I got caught out last week and I'm making sure I don't get caught out this time. I have a strategy in place.
Do you agree with the reason why they're striking, or?
Wholeheartedly.
It's going to be very inconvenient, so, you know, and it's hurting the people. It's actually, you know, I don't see the point. So there's other ways of trying to, you know, get your point across, I think, rather than hurt the people that use the services.
I definitely support the rail strikes. I support anybody striking for a better pay.
It's a blame game. Both sides say they are willing to negotiate, but there's no public sign of these talks actually taking place.
Get off the picket line, round the negotiating table, and let's get these damaging strikes to an end. There's a fair and reasonable payoff on the table for the people you represent, Mick. So let's get round the table and let's see if we can get the dispute sorted out.
If there's an invite, we'll be there today, tomorrow, or whenever it is that they want to get there. But there has to be a change. We've been hearing the same stuff for 6 months or more, that they want to facilitate a settlement. Well, they've got to prove that now.
It's estimated the rail strikes have cost bars, pubs, restaurants and hotels in the UK at least £1.5 billion in December alone.
It is a hugely challenging time for them, and for those that are in city centres, the rail strikes are undoubtedly hammering a final nail into their coffin as they see a big loss of revenue. They are the collateral damage of these rail strikes. It's unlikely that the strikes themselves will put them out of business, but that perfect storm of a cost of doing business crisis, soaring energy bills, food price inflation, wage rate inflation, and a cost of living crisis with a consumer downturn means that the businesses in the middle are struggling to survive. We've lost 2,500 over the last quarter. We anticipate we'll lose as many again in the forthcoming quarter.
The Nighttime Industries Association estimates that its members lost £2 billion in the month of December. Usually a key time for the hospitality sector to gain revenue, they will now struggle to survive through a traditionally quieter month of the year.
Well, Ellie is live for us at London Euston Station and can bring us up to date with the latest. Ellie.
Yes, good afternoon to you, Paul. That familiar sight of picket lines up and down the country outside rail stations. Not here at Euston, though. They have just packed up. But I have just taken a walk through Euston Station here in London, and it is eerily quiet. Only a few trains running. Lots of confused tourists standing underneath those boards, wondering where their train services are today. But it is the second day of the first 48-hour walkout by the RMT this week. Another one is coming on Friday and Saturday this week, and tomorrow we've got a separate walkout by ASLEF, the train drivers union. They're also walking out in a strike over pay and conditions, which means that Sunday is the only day this week without any form of strike action. But there's even warnings that there'll be disruption on Sunday as well, because of course the trains, the drivers, the workers, they'll all be in the wrong place. So the warning and the advice this week is do not travel unless it is absolutely essential. And British people are now getting very, very used to this. They're going about on their cars and their bikes, perhaps taking the tube to work instead, because the train service simply isn't providing a service for them at the moment. But there is a glimmer of hope in this dispute, Paul, and I spoke to Mick Lynch this morning, the boss of the RMT, and he told me that talks with the government will resume on Monday.
Our members are backing us, our officers are reporting into us that everything's going well. The employers are telling us that the train service is severely depleted. I mean, that doesn't give us any joy, but that's the point of a dispute and an industrial action, that we try and impact on the companies. We hope that'll have the effect of bringing them back to the table with some proposals that we can develop along with them and the government. And we've got a meeting next Monday with the government, convening a meeting with the employers and ourselves, and we'll see what develops from there. We'll work towards a solution if we can.
So a glimmer of hope there from Mick Lynch, the boss of the RMT, and that follows positive messaging as well from the Network Rail boss, who said that a deal is within touching distance. Now, that is all to be seen next week when these talks resume once again, but at the crux of this dispute are arguments that both sides just haven't been able to meet on quite yet, things like guards on trains and also working conditions. So it will be interesting to see how they square that circle, but that is a glimmer of hope that we heard from Mick Lynch today, that talks will resume on Monday, and it will be very interesting to see what Rishi Sunak says about strike action, industrial action in his speech in the next hour.
Ellie, thank you. Let's go to our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, who joins us from Wolverhampton Station now. What's the situation like where you are, Jack?
Well, you can probably just see the picket line over my shoulder. There's members of the RMT who have been coming out and showing their support for this industrial action. There's been a few members as well coming on their break and kind of sharing this unity, and that's the message that I've kind of felt from the picket line here today when I've been talking to them about the issues about them striking, about the things that they kind of took issue with in the deals that have been offered to them so far. Of course, we know that Network Rail offered the RMT a 5% pay rise, which was backdated for 2022, a 4% pay rise for 2023, as well as other kind of perks, including things like discounted rail travel for the staff's family and friends, as well as the rail infrastructure manager guaranteeing no compulsory redundancies before 2025 and no changes to their terms and conditions. The terms and conditions is one of the things that people on the picket line have been speaking to me about. They've been saying it's not just the pay, of course, with increases in the cost of living and things, no pay rises for them over the past few years. That is something that is an issue for them, but it's the terms and conditions and the way that the railway companies want to change how the network works. Things like driver-only trains, taking guards off trains. A lot of guards here are striking because not only is it going to mean the loss of their job, but they feel particularly around the safety element of passengers on trains if that guard is removed. Another thing about removing ticket offices from stations across the country. Lots of people saying that they don't think that's a great idea, and they're red lines as well for Mick Lynch, saying that they're not going to be part of the negotiation when he sits down with the government and with people like Network Rail, who now say that they're close to a deal with the RMT to take these members out of industrial action. Where the wiggle room has come from, we're not quite sure, because when they offered that 9% in total pay rise, they said that was their best and final offer. So we're not really sure what's going to happen in terms of who moves and where this negotiation comes to. But that's what ending these strikes is going to have to be all about. It's going to be about a negotiation and people coming together back to the table. Mark Harper saying yesterday as the Transport Secretary, get off the picket line, come back to the table as well. We know that passenger footfall, according to Network Rail, around the country at stations has been down around 84%. So we know that people are staying away from the train lines. Here in the West Midlands at Wolverhampton, we've got very few services running, a lot just running 1 per hour. So we're kind of having swathes of customers coming in when those trains are coming in. But so disruption here, people having to find alternative ways to travel, and negotiations are going to have to continue between the RMT, the government and the operating companies.
OK, thank you very much for that, Jack. That's our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carsons, who is at Wolverhampton Station. It's just coming up to 1:20. You're with GB News Live, coming up with 4 days into 2023. So how's your New Year resolutions going? We'll be talking about that next. Before that, let's have a look at how the weather's shaping up.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here with the latest forecast from the Met Office. Drier for many today, but not for all. There is still some rain around and a strong wind, although that wind keeping things mild. It was a mild start to the day, especially in the south, and we've still got a lot of cloud across the UK, but a better chance of some breaks developing East Wales into the Midlands, East Anglia, North East Scotland as well. Now for North West Scotland as well as for Wales, there'll be some showers, but Northern Ireland, Southern Scotland and Northern England seeing the bulk of the rain through the day. However, everywhere is going to be mild, certainly milder for northern Scotland compared with recent days. Temperatures back to around average here, above average across the rest of the UK, 13 or 14 Celsius in the south. And those temperatures stay up overnight, along with this brisk breeze, although the wind does tend to ease during the hours of darkness. And the rain also eventually disappears overnight, with clear spells developing. Touch of frost for northeast Scotland, but elsewhere, it's a mild start to Thursday. A dry start initially for many, but these weather fronts are coming along. The warm front initially will be a weak feature. The cold front bringing more rain. For most places, that will be later in the day on Thursday. So we start the day with the cloud thickening in the west, some outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Much of this pushing northeastwards during the morning, and some places will miss it entirely. It's a very showery feature. However, for Scotland and Northern Ireland, here the rain turns heavier and more persistent later in the day, especially for western areas. And with a wind once again from the southwest, it's a mild day. 14 Celsius in London, 8 to 9 Celsius for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But it is a wet end to the day for Scotland and Northern Ireland. The wind picking up as well as this rain pushes through. And it's really during the hours of darkness again across England and Wales where we see the rain move through. And then it turns very windy overnight for Scotland in particular. Gales or even severe gales for the northwest. Saturday and Sunday, blustery with showers.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1:23. Welcome back to GB News Live. Good to have you with us. We're going to talk about the NHS now because the Health Secretary has blamed a surge of flu cases, COVID and Strep A concerns for pressures the NHS faced over Christmas. Stephen Barclay says the situation isn't acceptable and the government is focused on freeing up hospital beds to help create more capacity and ensure ambulance handover times are reduced. It's a senior doctors say the service is in crisis, with trusts and ambulance services declaring critical incidents. Joining me now is Nigel Edwards, Chief Executive of the Nuffield Trust. Good to see you, Nigel. First of all, do you accept this assessment from Steve Barclay?
Well, I think the NHS was in significant trouble before the flu season arrived, and has been under huge pressure really for the last year. The number of things happening. First of all, COVID's still with us, so there's about 10% of the beds still got patients with COVID. We've also seen a big increase in patients waiting to go home or to nursing homes because the social care system is broken. You may remember that the Prime Minister last but one promised that it was going to be fixed. Unfortunately, that fix was largely aimed at protecting property rather than actually creating a social care system that functions. So people are stuck in hospital, which means the emergency departments are full because they can't empty the patients into the wards, which means the ambulances can't empty the patients into the emergency department, which means that the ambulances can't get out to see people. And meantime, general practice is under huge pressure as well. People seem to have become less resilient, and there seems to be more illness around, and particularly mental health and cardiac conditions as well. So there's a whole collection of difficult things all going on at once, but it's more complex than the Secretary of State suggests.
Yeah, what would you like to hear from Rishi Sunak? Which we are expecting him to talk about the NHS this afternoon. What would you like to hear from him?
Well, there's still unfinished business to sort out the perverse incentives associated with senior doctors' pensions that creates a big incentive for them not to do extra work and in fact even to cut their hours. So I'd hope that after lots of promises, and we've heard them from some now for over the course of at least two prime ministers, those would be fixed, and that's still not fixed. Social care, they put some money in, but the problem is it's not enough to keep. I think if I was a social care provider, if I ran a business running social care, I'm not going to invest and take on extra staff on the basis of a short-term input of money. When I'm competing against Aldi and Lidl for staff, I can't increase my pay if I can't depend on that money coming in future, and if it's only a short So I'd like a longer-term fix to the social care problem. We've got to do more to take pressure off general practice and stop people leaving. We've done quite a bit of recruitment, but we've not really done enough, I think, to stop the burnout that we're seeing, not just in this country, across the whole of the UK, and actually in other countries too. And that's an urgent priority to take the pressure off them. So there's quite a long list. Unfortunately, none of them are very quick because many of the problems are long term and they will require long term solutions.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, actually. In the short term, to get us out of this hole that we're clearly in at the moment, what would you like to see? Because Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, has suggested bringing in the private care sector to try and help alleviate the backlog.
That will help with surgery. I mean, in fact, the private sector already do quite a lot of surgery, but of course, it's worth remembering that the doctors who do that surgery are actually largely NHS doctors, so you aren't necessarily imagining up any additional staff. You may create some capacity that can be used, which won't be filled up by emergency patients. So the big priority, I think, is to get patients who are in hospital who don't need to be there, and there's about 12,000 or so of them, and that's about 14% of the total beds, out of the hospital into nursing homes, back into their own homes, and the only way to do that is to do something about the social care system. But that's not that easy because we're quite high we're quite close to full employment. Though there are a lot of people not working who perhaps could. Whether they can do social care is another matter. It's quite a demanding job. But we're going to have to pay some of those people more. We'll have to fix the 0-hour culture that infects some of that area of business. But that's the thing that would make the biggest impact, and it would unlock the system right the way back up. It would free up the emergency departments, it would free up the ambulances, and it would take some of the stress off the system. But even that's not an easy solution, but it could be relatively quick.
Nigel, really good to get your thoughts this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. That is Nigel Edwards from the Nuffield Trust. So we're expecting the PM to mention the NHS when he announces plans for all pupils in England to study some form of maths until the age of 18. This is in his big speech, which we're expecting in the next half an hour. It's first big speech of 2023. He's expected to argue letting children into the workplace without math skills is letting them down, as children's future jobs will require more analytical skills. Jim Pickard is Chief Political Editor at the Financial Times. Good to see you, Jim. Were you surprised that Number 10 was briefing ahead of this speech with maths instead of migrants or the NHS or strikes?
So I think by the time we get to the end of today, the focus will have shifted away from mathematics and it will have shifted onto those big issues of the small boats crossing the English Channel, questions over NHS in particular, over overcrowded A&E departments, and very much onto the economy, trying to tackle inflation, trying to avoid a deep, long recession, trying to get inflation down, trying to push interest rates down, which is much easier said than done. I mean, I think the mathematics was a kind of curiosity, and it's a pointer towards the new Prime Minister's thinking, but I don't think that's what this is about. I think what this is really about is we've got a new Prime Minister who has not got a mandate from the general public. He's not been in charge of the Conservative Party at a general election. He wasn't even the first choice of Tory MPs in the summer. He has got a lot to prove, and he has also got an incredible number of difficult issues in his in-tray. And I think this is the point where he's going to try and speak to the nation and say, these are my plans for how to tackle them.
Yeah, but do you think we're going to hear any of the how, or is it just going to be more of the, this is what's important, this is what I'm going to do, not the how?
Well, Rishi Sunak, in contrast to his predecessors, in particular Boris Johnson, is a more technocratic, managerial figure. You know, he worked in finance. He's the master of detail. When he worked at the Treasury, officials talked about how he was someone who's not afraid of getting to grips with the detail of policy. And we saw with small boats, he put out an announcement, I think before Christmas, where he did have quite a detailed list of measures, including an agreement with the Albanian government, which he hopes will get down the number of people making that crossing over the channel. And I think we'll probably see the same, if not today, but in the future, with how precisely he wants to sort out the difficulties in the NHS and also avoid this long, deep recession. But the problem he's got is that the difficulties facing him are of a magnitude not seen for quite a long time by any British Prime Minister. When you think about the likelihood of a prolonged Russian occupation or invasion of Ukraine, when you think about mortgage rates set to go up, and even if headline interest rates don't go up any further, you've got millions of people who took out their mortgages when interest rates were basically zero, who are going to see their borrowing rates go up in the next few months and over the next couple of years. There's nothing obvious he can do to deal with that. And you've also got these industrial action strikes right across the public sector, which he seems to just be saying, well, our deal's fine, you guys need to back down. But at the moment, they're not backing down. So whether he has a solution for the wave of strikes remains to be seen. I don't really envy him. The one thing he does have as an advantage, though, is when you look at the opinion polls, the Labour Party may be about 20 points ahead of the Conservatives, but in terms of Keir Starmer versus Rishi Sunak as party leader, at the moment, Rishi Sunak is apparently ahead. So I think for Conservative voters and supporters and members, that does give them some hope at least.
Yeah, really good to get your thoughts, Jim. Thank you so much. Jim Pickard there, who's Chief Political Correspondent at the FT. So we're expecting that speech from the Prime Minister around about 2 o'clock. We'll bring that to you here on GB News Live. In the meantime, is Britain broken? It is, according to the leader of the Reform Party, who set out his vision to tackle problems he says are of the Tories' making. We'll be talking about that and soaring food prices next after we get the latest news headlines from Tamsin.
Paul, thank you. It's 1:33. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Well, in just over half an hour, the Prime Minister is to announce plans for all pupils in England to study some form of maths until the age of 18. In his first speech of 2023, Rishi Sunak will lay out his priorities for the year ahead, including what he calls reimagining our approach to numeracy. He'll argue letting children into the workplace without maths skills is letting them down, as their future jobs will require more analytical skills. School teacher and maths ambassador Bobby Seagull says there's a significant need for increased focus on maths.
One of the headline stats that the Prime Minister talked about was that there were 8 million adults in England, that's 1 in 2, that had the numeracy skills that we'd expect from an 11-year-old primary school child. And that's where I think is the key failing. You might have passed an exam at 16, but 10, 12 years down the line, when you get your mortgage bill or you get like a bank statement, do you understand what's going on? So I think it's translating the math skills on paper to real life numeracy application.
Around half of Britain's railway lines are closed, with only a fifth of services running, as 40,000 rail workers strike again today. RMT members across Network Rail and 14 train companies are on day 2 of a 48-hour strike in a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. Food inflation hit a record 13.3% last month due to soaring prices. That's up from 12.4% in the previous month. It comes as the latest price index showed the overall shop price inflation eased slightly to 7.3% in December. A leading doctor has warned toothbrushes are becoming a luxury item as soaring costs are forcing families to buy food over a toothbrush and toothpaste. In an interview with the British Medical Journal, Dr Camilla Kingdon says the state of children's teeth is alarming evidence of how the cost of living crisis is impacting children's health. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. It is 1:37. We're going to talk about the Reform Party now because its leader has this afternoon set out his vision to tackle the challenges faced by the country this year. In a speech in central London, Richard Tice accused the Conservatives of breaking Britain. He also unveiled plans to lift the income tax starting threshold, which he says leaves too many people trapped on benefits, to £20,000. Our political reporter, Catherine Forster, is here. Catherine, what else did he have to say?
Well, the Reform Party, of course, was originally the Brexit Party under Nigel Farage, then became the Reform Party. They were largely anti-lockdown. And since then, they've sort of been looking for what they represent. And they did come out with some really quite interesting policies. I think we've got a little clip. Let's have a look.
Back in the 1990s, total tax take in this country was about 28%. It's now the highest ever since the Second World War at 37%. You pay for it with growth. You've got to grow your way out of a crisis. You can't tax your way out of a crisis. The current con-socialist governments have completely and utterly got this wrong. And you do that by cutting taxes for the lowest paid, the least well off. And my plans that I've announced today would free up 6 million people from paying any income tax by starting the threshold at £20,000. Because we've got to get some of the millions of people on out-of-work benefits, there's obviously a cost and a burden on the taxpayer, back into work.
So that's a big pledge, isn't it? So he's proposing to raise the threshold at which you begin paying tax from £12,500 that it is currently to £20,000, and also that all frontline health workers, not managers, not people working in admin, but nurses, doctors, social care workers, wouldn't pay basic rate tax at all. So these are big pledges. They want a low tax, high growth economy. I did say to him, well, it sounds a little bit like Trustonomics, and look where that went. But he really stressed that she was trying to trickle down tax cuts at the top. They have the completely opposite approach. They want to bring tax cuts in that will help everybody, and particularly the people at the bottom, and the impact that will have. Then, of course, you'd ask, how is it paid for?
That was my next question.
Yeah. Well, he said 5% across all government departments. Of course, government departments have been cut and cut and cut during austerity going back. But also things like scrapping HS2. They say there's 20 to 40 billion pounds per annum to be made by stopping interest from the Bank of England being given to commercial banks on reserves from quantitative easing, the quantitative easing programme, which he says other central banks do not do. So that's another large chunk of money. So some interesting policies, and they have been sort of bumbling around on 4 to 5% the last year or so. But since Liz Truss and since the chaos in the Conservative Party that precipitated, they've gone up to about 8, occasionally 9%. So they're pretty much level with the Lib Dems, and they do hope, they're saying they're going to field candidates in all seats in the general election. They're not going to do any deals with the Conservatives.
Well, I was going to say, it's total coincidence he's making this announcement on the same day as Rishi Sunak's big set speech, isn't it?
He says getting ahead of the curve, the first leader to be out of the traps.
Yeah.
But, the Conservatives
will be worried about reform on their right flank, right?
They will
heading
be.
into the as we sort of take this long lead up to the next election.
They will be, and because they are seeming to beginning to gain some momentum, and some of these policies do sound attractive. OK, you've got to get to the nitty-gritty of how they're being paid. I did say, are you not worried that, you know, if people vote for you, that's just going to lead to a bigger Labour majority? And he didn't seem to be, particularly because he basically says that the Conservative Party is not the Conservative Party that it used to be, that it should be. He calls them the con-socialists, doesn't he? That they have moved away from what conservatism should be, i.e. small state and low taxes, and reform have a different offer. So it will be interesting to see what happens, but one to watch, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And just before you go, I know this is, you don't know I was going to ask you this, but have you made any New Year's resolutions?
No, do you know what? I haven't got around to it. What date are we now? A bit late now. No,
Yeah.
do you know what?
Is it too
really
late now? I don't
always
know.
break them.
Discuss.
I always break them.
It's January the 4th. Yeah.
I'm certainly not drinking.
Right, OK. All right. Well, that's one. There you go. For what, just for January?
No. I mean, the dry January, I'm not having any truck with that, because January is miserable anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, it is pretty miserable, to be honest. Thank you. Appreciate that. Catherine Forster there, our political correspondent. I am asking her about New Year's resolutions because we've been looking at some of the ways that people are kicking off their New Year's pledges with our North West reporter, Sophie Reaper.
Kicking off the new year with a bang. As we settle into 2023, millions of us will attempt to maintain our chosen New Year's resolutions. Hitting the gym is always a popular choice. But what about something a little bit different?
Other popular New Year's resolutions are things like reducing stress and improving mental health. And what better way to combine those two things than with a bit of yoga? Especially when you involve puppies.
You've heard of downward facing dog. Well, this is puppy yoga.
When we practice yoga, we draw focus to the breath. By doing so, we take ourselves away from the constant chatter in the mind. Also, by slowing the breath down, can help a person to feel relaxed. It can calm the central nervous system, which helps with feelings like stress and anxiety. And then when we add puppies into this, it just seems to boost everyone's mood. Everyone leaves smiling, happy, laughing. There's great feedback. And the puppies really seem to enjoy it too. So it's just an absolutely beautiful thing to do.
Working with ethical breeders, Paw Yoga gives the puppies a chance to socialise and have some fun before being adopted by their forever homes. Of course, it's great fun for the human participants too.
So if you're going to make any New Year's resolutions this year, I really recommend to try yoga. It's a really mindful thing that really helps with mental health, helps with physical health. There's just so many benefits. I could sit here and list all the benefits to you, but if you really just give it a try, you'll notice it for yourselves.
For some, puppy yoga could be the perfect way to start 2023. But for others, there's just no replacement for a good old-fashioned sweat.
During the Christmas period, people tend to sort of relax a little bit more, tend to overindulge, and then by the end of Christmas, they're like, oh, you know what, I don't feel 100%, and then first thing that comes to mind is like, I just want to get moving again.
Over the last few days, the number of gym memberships is sure to have skyrocketed. But what advice did Joe have for keeping up with your chosen resolution?
Start small, don't overestimate what you can achieve. Do something small, little things you can do each day, and then that'll snowball into getting into that bigger picture, that bigger routine. It's the little things that you do that will get you the results that you're looking for.
No matter what your resolution is this new year, remember, it's all about finding the right balance. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Nice finish there with the old balance. That is Sophie Reaper, our North West reporter. It is 1:45. We'll be bringing you Rishi Sunak's speech in around about 15 minutes here on GB News Live. In the meantime, Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has condemned the Conservative government for record high food prices, saying all 12 years of Tory government have left us with is higher prices, lower wages and growth on the floor. Now, this follows this morning's figures from the British Retail Consortium, revealing a jump to 13.3% in December from 12.4% the previous month, with fresh food prices seeing the biggest rise. Well, joining me now to break it all down for us is our excellent economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Liam, tell us a bit more about fresh food and why it's so much more expensive than everything else.
Yeah, let's just lay out some of these numbers. Lots of data floating around this morning. This isn't official data. It's from the British Retail Consortium, which is an industry body group. And what they're showing here, Paul, I've got a graphic we can put up on the screen for GB News TV viewers anyway, is that in November, fresh food inflation was 14.3%, so 14.3% more expensive in November, a basket of fresh food, than in November 2021. In December, that went up to 15%, and that is the highest fresh food inflation number on record. Again, these are not official numbers, these are industry numbers. Yeah. Here's an official number. The CPI, the Consumer Price Index, that's a basket of all goods in November, that was 10.7%. And the December Consumer Price Index number, that comes out on the 18th of January. So you and I will be talking about that here on GB News then. What the point here is, Paul, is that inflation is very high. It's at a 40-year high, 10.7% there. It's down just a tiny bit from the month before. But food inflation is considerably higher than general inflation. And that's why this ghastly inflation that we've had during 2022 is likely to continue into 2023, at least the first half of 2023. It disproportionately hits worse off families because they're the ones who spend more of their money on things like food, housing, fuel for heating and for vehicles, which have been higher priced over the last year, much higher price rises than goods in general. That's why the headline inflation number, as I always say, is not the real world. Yeah. For a lot of people in the real world, actual inflation is much, much higher than that 10.7% official CPI number.
Yeah. Fresh food, why is it so much higher? Is it still the war in Ukraine and fuel? Are those the two factors?
Partly the war in Ukraine. Food prices are driven by what we call the 3 Fs. Farmers call the 3 Fs. The cost of finance, because they often have to put money up front to pay for everything, and then they get the money back when they sell the food. Of course, finance has been going up a lot in cost because the Bank of England is raising interest rates. Another F is fuel, as you say. Farming can be quite a fuel-intensive business, combine harvesters, trucks to transport the food. Food is heavy per unit of value. You know, if you have a truckload of potatoes, they're not worth a lot, but it costs a lot to transport them. And the third F after finance and fuel is fertiliser. And the cost of fertiliser is closely linked to the price of natural gas. We use natural gas to make fertiliser, and also the price of something which very few broadcasters in the UK have heard of before the war in Ukraine, potash. It's a potassium derivative. It's used to make fertiliser, and some of the world's biggest exporters of potash are places like Belarus, like Russia. A lot of it comes out through those southern Ukrainian ports like Odessa, which, of course, have been almost impassable for a lot of the period of this war in Ukraine. That's why fertiliser... Talk to any farmer where I live in North Essex. I talk to lots of farmers. Fertiliser prices in 2022 were 4-5 times higher than they were the year before. They've come down a bit, but they're still a lot higher than before in the war in Ukraine. That is feeding into food prices. And, of course, a lot of the time, the supermarkets are only putting... You know, they're letting the farmers take the increase in costs. Well, that's why so many farmers are being squeezed.
Well, let's talk about supermarket prices now, because you've been looking into that as well, haven't you?
I have. So, I mean, I talk a lot here on GB News during these On the Money sections on sort of the finance of farmers. They are, a lot of them, getting squeezed by the supermarkets, there's no doubt. But there's a bigger picture here, and I've got another graphic with some numbers. Yeah. How the UK's supermarket sector is changing as food prices go up. Here you see Aldi on the screen. Aldi are a German-owned discounter. They're totally upending food retailing in the UK. Yeah. During the 3 months to Christmas, Aldi's sales were up 27% by value, absolutely huge. And the other main discounter, Lidl, their sales were up by almost 24%. Have a look at Tesco. They were up 6.5% and Sainsbury's were up 6%. Now, Tesco and Sainsbury's, they are the traditional mid-market supermarkets. They still have a much bigger market share than Aldi and Lidl. But as food prices get higher, as household budgets get squeezed, Aldi and Lidl are eating into that market share. Now, it's not as if we spent less this Christmas than the previous Christmas, because the previous Christmas was almost a lockdown Christmas, you'll remember. This Christmas, there was a kind of exuberance. An awful lot of people put money on credit cards. People remortgaging their houses as they were getting new mortgage deals with interest rates going up. Because this was our first post-lockdown Christmas in 3 years. So overall, food sales are up. But it's interesting that Aldi and Lidl really made inroads into the dominant position of the traditional mid-market supermarkets as consumers go in search of value.
So the only way that Tesco's, Sainsbury's, those kind of supermarkets can compete is if they narrow their price margins more?
Well, compete.
Squeeze their price.
Tesco is still the biggest food retailer in Britain. It's the biggest retailer overall. Sainsbury's is not far behind. Aldi and Lidl have got a long way to go before they completely trounce Tesco and Sainsbury's. I doubt they ever will. These are massively...
But they're going to be worried, aren't they?
Well, they'll be worried because they're ultra-competitive. This is one area, right, where there is competition in this country. There is not much competition in many other parts of the economy, but in food retailing, they do compete. They don't always give farmers the best deal, but they compete between themselves, the big food retailers. And Tesco and Sainsbury's will certainly be looking to stop the advance of Aldi and Lidl, even though Tesco's and Sainsbury's, for now, remain very, very dominant in this sector.
Yeah, and just very quickly, before we let you go, fuel at the moment, Nimi, it's $1.50 for unleaded, a litre. Is that going to stay that way, or is it going to go back up?
Well, it depends where the wholesale price of oil goes. I was tweeting a lot over the holidays that the wholesale price of oil and indeed the wholesale price of gas on European markets is now below where it was before Putin invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February. Yet, of course, diesel prices are 30% higher, as any man with a van will tell you, or woman with a van these days, of course. And, of course, we all know what's happened to our electricity bills, and a lot of our electricity comes from gas. So even though wholesale prices have fallen a lot since their peak in the summer, our gas bills, when we fill up our cars and vans on the forecourt, it's still a lot more expensive. Rather than go on about maths, I think Rishi Sunak should be talking more about that, because that's the kind of thing that really impacts hard-pressed families. Not that I don't like maths.
It just doesn't add up for you.
I see what you did there. I think it detracts from the national debate.
You see what I did back to do that. Yeah, that's very good. Yes.
No, I want our kids to be more literate, and Sunak's onto something. We have a lot more functional illiteracy in this country than any other country in the OECD. At the bottom end, a fifth of our adults don't have basic math skills. That's clearly terrible. But I also want him, hopefully, when he stands up on his hind legs in 20 minutes or so, I want him to be hitting these big picture cost of living issues that are really on the minds of families. They're taking the Christmas decorations down, the credit card bills are about to arrive. People want to know how they're going to get through this year. They want leadership from this government. If he doesn't provide it, I think he'll suffer more even than now at the opinion polls.
Yeah, definitely. Liam, really good to get your thoughts. Thank you so much, Liam Halligan, our business and economics editor. Also joining us in the studio to talk about that speech is our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, I'll spare you those appalling dad jokes, but we are going to hear about maths.
Well, we can divide up these jokes between ourselves. But
it's not even a dad.
Not yet. It's really clear what Rishi Sunak is trying to do with this speech, and that's to move on the conversation. The last 10 weeks of his premiership have been about firefighting, have been about trying to sort of regain control and not really going on the offensive in terms of what his premiership is all about. This is, of course, his first domestic policy speech. It's the first time that he's really been able to, in his own terms, set out what his premiership is for, what a Rishi Sunak Britain is going to look like, what are the big challenges he wants to take on. And I think that we're going to see some of that today. Of course, maths is what's been trailed in advance of this speech, but I'd be very surprised if there wasn't much more to it, if there wasn't a broader theme in terms of what he's looking to do in the next 1.5, 2 years that he's in charge.
And so I'm going to guess NHS, migrants, maybe strikes.
I put inflation in there too. After all, the Prime Minister has been for the last, well, for as long as he's been Prime Minister, 10 weeks or so, been saying that this is the #1 enemy. This is something that he said during the leadership contest as well, that without sorting inflation, not much else can follow. And ultimately, this has been his logic behind what some might describe as a miserly position on public sector pay. And of course, we've seen all of these strikes flow from this decision to not grant double-digit pay rises to people. The Rishi Sunak administration says that those double-digit pay increases would embed inflation, would keep double-digit inflation going for years to come. I think that Rishi Sunak really does want to emphasise his desire to get inflation down. We may well hear more about how he intends to do that.
Yeah, and on the NHS, he said he's going to take personal charge, which surprised me because he's really nailing his colours to this one. And if the situation in the NHS doesn't improve, with an election coming up as well, you can lay that personally at his door.
You certainly can, and yes, it's very hard for him to ignore this situation. Clearly, it's at the forefront of so many people's minds. Everyone can see the queues, the ambulances waiting outside the hospitals. Everyone can, frankly, see the amount of money that has also gone into the NHS.
Yeah.
A 40% funding increase in real terms, adjusted for inflation, 40% more cash going into this organisation than 12 years ago. It's the most extraordinary amount of money, now well above the OECD average for funding a health system. And yet those outcomes have got worse. And clearly there are issues with the pandemic backlog and everything else. But clearly the government really does need to make that investment, the overwhelming investment that has gone into the NHS. They need to make that feel like it's gone in.
Yeah.
They need to see those outcomes match those inputs.
Well, a big part of that a lot of people talk about is social care. Do you think we might hear something about that this afternoon?
Well, it's interesting because, of course, that social care reform that Boris Johnson announced a couple of years ago has been rather delayed and dismantled to some extent by the last 2 administrations. Now, the money that was going to plug that sort of health and social care levy that was initially going into the NHS and then meant to go into social care, now that's being taken out of general taxation rather than a specific health and social care levy plugged onto national insurance as was the original plan. But it's also being delayed in terms of when it's going to social care, the money much going to the NHS first. And of course, that creates some knock-on effects. I'm not sure we're going to hear some details about root and branch social care reform today, but clearly this has got to be something that's very high up the government's agenda.
Yeah, migrants?
Migrants has been described as one of Rishi Sunak's top priorities by his spokespeople for a very long time now. It's something that particularly affects those red wall constituencies, the constituencies that Rishi Sunak really needs to hold on to, the ones that he has lost by the largest degree if we look at the opinion polls, the ones that are most expected to go back to Labour at the next election. These are the seats that tend to care most about the illegal migration situation that this country is seeing. It's a hugely emotional issue. It's seeing those boats come across, seeing the loss of life. It's emotional and it's evocative. And the Prime Minister has said time and time again that this is one of his top priorities. And it will be interesting to see if he puts any hard and fast metrics and how he's going to deal with this.
Yeah, because do you think he needs to make any big policy announcements on migration, given they had that, will have feel vindicated by the High Court ruling in their favour when it came to the Rwanda deportation?
They certainly will have done, but yet, let's not forget, not a single plane has yet left British soil for Rwanda. Of course, there was an announcement by the Prime Minister a few weeks ago on dealing with those channel crossings, a new agreement with Albania, I should say, an updated agreement. Of course, we had one beforehand as well, and new processing officers, new rules for those officers to try and speed up deportations as well. It all seems a bit technical. I wonder if today that will be sort of re-announced, emphasised what has has been agreed. But I say again, potentially sort of metrics by which we can judge this Prime Minister, challenges that he wants to overcome.
Yeah, and we are expecting the Prime Minister to appear in around about a couple of minutes, I'm being told, so we will cross to East London for that speech when it begins. In the meantime, just very quickly, Tom, if we just get a word from you on industrial action, do you think he'll talk about changing the law to make it harder?
Well, this has been one of the big promises. Actually, the Conservative government, since it was elected in 2019, has been promising this minimum operation reform for particularly the railways. Then we hear a few weeks ago that the Prime Minister was looking to expand that into other areas. We yet haven't heard the detail of this, though, and that's the really interesting point. There's been all of this talk about what's going on behind the scenes, that this is being worked on, that things haven't been taken off the table, but we're yet to hear that detail.
OK, Tom, I'm going to have to interrupt you there because the Prime Minister is about to tell us what he wants to do in 2023. Let's have a listen in.
New Year should be a time of optimism and excitement. Yet I know many of you look ahead to 2023 with apprehension. I want you to know that as your Prime Minister, I will work night and day to change that, and quickly. Not just by providing relief and peace of mind for the months to come, although we will, but also by changing our country and building a better future for our children and grandchildren, a future that restores optimism, hope, and pride in Britain. Let me first address two issues that I know are at the forefront of everyone's minds. I know there are challenges in A&E. People are understandably anxious when they see ambulances queuing outside hospitals. You should know we're taking urgent action, increasing bed capacity by 7,000 more hospital beds and more people cared at home, providing new funding to discharge people into social care in the community, freeing up beds, and the NHS are working urgently on future plans for A&E and ambulances. And on strikes, there's a lot of misinformation out there, so I want people to clearly understand the government's position. We hugely value public sector workers like nurses. They do incredibly important work. And that's why we want a reasonable dialogue with the unions about what's responsible and fair for our country. And in the coming days, we will update you on the government's next steps. Today, I want to make a simple commitment. This government will always reflect the people's priorities. People don't want politicians who promise the earth and then fail to deliver. They want government to focus less on politics and more on the things they care about. The cost of living, too high. Waiting times in the NHS, too long. Illegal migration, far too much. I think people do accept that many of these challenges are, at least in part, the legacy of COVID and impacted by the war in Ukraine. But that's not an excuse. We need to address these problems, not just talk about them. And since I became Prime Minister, we've made progress, stabilised the economy and people's mortgage rates, provided £26 billion of support for the cost of living, invested billions more in schools, the NHS and social care, deepened ties with allies around the world on everything from Ukraine to our collective economic security, continued our unwavering support for the armed forces in their efforts to keep us safe, and set out a concrete plan to stop the boats and tackle the unfairness of illegal migration. But of course, we need to do more. So I want to make 5 promises to you today, 5 pledges to deliver peace of mind, 5 foundations on which to build a better future for our children and grandchildren. First, we will halve inflation this year to ease the cost of living and give people financial security. Second, we will grow the economy, creating better paid jobs and opportunity right across the country. Third, we will make sure our national debt is falling so that we can secure the future of public services. Fourth, NHS waiting lists will fall and people will get the care they need more quickly. Fifth, we will pass new laws to stop small boats, making sure that if you come to this country illegally, you are detained and swiftly removed. So, 5 promises. We will halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the boats. Those are the people's priorities. They are your government's priorities, and we will either have achieved them or not. No tricks, no ambiguity. We're either delivering for you or we're not. We will rebuild trust in politics through action or not at all. So I ask you to judge us on the effort that we put in and the results that we achieve. Now, these 5 promises are the people's priorities, so they're my immediate priorities too. But they're not the limit of my ambitions for our country. They're the foundation. My aim is to build a better future for our children and grandchildren, a future where they feel optimism, hope and pride. And to realise that vision, we need to change our mindset. Now, politicians talk a lot about change, but the truth is, no government, no prime minister can change a country by force of will or diktat alone. Real change isn't provided, it's created. It's not given, it's demanded, not granted, but invented. The choices we make as individuals, as workers, business owners, parents, all add up to something far greater. And if we're honest, change also requires sacrifice and hard work. It's a big risk for a politician to say that, but the stakes are too high and the rewards too great not to level with you. So change is hard. It takes time, but it is possible. And we know that because we've done it before. During COVID, we protected millions of people's jobs and businesses, a record I'm proud of. And we know it's possible because you can see change happening. You can feel it. Just look at our state schools, empowered by reform in some of the most deprived parts of the country, producing some of the best results. Those teachers and pupils work hard and make sacrifices because they know that what they are doing is bigger than themselves. They demand, inspire, and deliver excellence. And their ethos of excellence can become the animating spirit of our nation. Inspired by them, together we can change our country's character. We can reverse the creeping acceptance of a narrative of decline, reject pessimism and fatalism, refuse limits on our aspirations. And to do that, we need to have the imagination and confidence to do things differently and better. The vision to do today what is needed for tomorrow. In other words, we need to change the way our country works. That requires a change in mindset. And what does that mean in practice? It means a more innovative economy, stronger communities and safer streets, a world-class education system, an NHS built around patients, and a society that truly values the family. In all these areas and more, we must have the courage to change, to think bigger, strive for excellence, not give up when things get tough. And if we can do that, then we really can build a better future. In the coming months, I will set out our plans in each of these areas. But let me set the direction today. A better future is one where our economy is growing faster so that everybody, everywhere across our union has new opportunities for better paying good jobs. And the change we need is to put innovation at the heart of everything we do. An ethos embodied by so many of the fantastic businesses right here at Plexel. Now, some people think innovation is about gadgets and geekery, a nice to have, peripheral to growth compared to the traditional levers of tax and spend. But that is exactly the mindset that we need to change. Let me tell you why innovation is so important. Over the last 50 years, it was responsible for around half of the UK's productivity increase. New jobs are created by innovation. People's wages increased by innovation. The cost of goods and services reduced by innovation. And major challenges like energy security and net zero will be solved by innovation. The more we innovate, the more we grow. And the world is seeing an incredible wave of scientific and technological change. So right now, the most powerful way to achieve higher growth is to make sure the UK is the most innovative economy in the world. And that's why we're increasing public funding in R&D to £20 billion to enhance our world-leading strengths in AI, life sciences, quantum, fintech and green technology, seizing the opportunities of Brexit to ensure our regulatory system is agile and pro-innovation, making sure entrepreneurial and fast-growing companies get the finance they need to expand, spreading a culture of creative thinking and doing things differently across every part of the UK. If we're going to deliver this better future, people will have to work hard. But I believe good, well-paid jobs are about more than just financial security. They give people purpose, confidence, dignity, the chance to build a better life from themselves. But I also believe that if you work hard and play by the rules, you should be rewarded. And which is why, as soon as we can, the government will reduce the burden of taxation on working people. And it is staggering that at a time when businesses are crying out for workers, a quarter of our labour force is inactive. So our growth plan will look at how we can support those who can to move back into work, including through the welfare system. Now, all of this will make this country a beacon of science, technology and enterprise, and lift our productivity, raise our growth rate, and create jobs in the decades to come. Good jobs give people pride in their own lives. But a better future also means reinforcing people's pride in the places they call home. And the change we need is to do away with the idea that it's inevitable that some communities and some places can never and will never get better. I love my local community, and it's not right that too many for far too long have not felt that same sense of meaning and belonging. The government can't create it. It's something that we build together. But the state does provide the foundations. So we will deliver on our promise to level up with greater investment in local areas, to boost growth, create jobs and reinvigorate our high streets and town centres. But all the regeneration in the world won't mean anything unless people feel safe in their communities. So by this spring, we'll have an extra 20,000 police officers patrolling the streets, answering the call for help and catching criminals. We've got to stop violence against women and girls. And let's be frank, that means men taking responsibility for creating a culture and society where women are safe in their communities and at home. We've got to reduce reoffending because a small number of career criminals account for disproportionate amounts of crime. And we've got to beat addiction because heroin and crack addicts account for almost half of all robberies. Strong communities are also built on values, on the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated yourself. But too often, a small minority break that golden rule. They spray graffiti on war memorials, discard needles and nitrous oxide canisters in children's playgrounds, gang together and cause disorder and disruption. Antisocial behaviour isn't inevitable or a minor crime. It makes life miserable for so many, and it can be a gateway to more extreme crimes. So this government will work tirelessly to crack down on antisocial behaviour, giving police forces, mayors and local authorities the tools they need, and giving communities confidence that these crimes will be quickly and visibly punished. Wherever you live in our United Kingdom, you should be able to feel proud of your community, and that's what we'll work together to achieve. So we will create a better future by changing our economy and strengthening our communities. We also need greater social justice. And the way we achieve that is education. This is personal for me. Every opportunity I've had in life began with the education I was so fortunate to receive. And it's the single most important reason why I came into politics, to give every child the highest possible standard of education. Thanks to the reforms we've introduced since 2010 and the hard work of so many excellent teachers, we've made incredible progress. But with the right plan, the right commitment to excellence, I cannot see any reason why we can't rival the best education systems in the world. To do that, yes, we'll need to fix the damage of COVID, especially for our youngest pupils. And yes, it will require more investment, which is why just a few weeks ago in the autumn statement, we provided £2 billion of extra funding for schools. But that's not the limit of our ambitions. We're not content with just catching up. First, we need to support good teaching and spread best practice with a plan to improve attainment in primary schools. Next, we need to stop seeing education as something that ends age 18 or that sees university as the only option, with more technical education, lifelong learning and apprenticeships. And one of the biggest challenges in mindset we need in education today is to reimagine our approach to numeracy. As Chancellor, I introduced Multiply, a new programme to give hundreds of thousands of adults the opportunity to get the basic numerical skills they need. But we're one of the few countries not to require our children to study some form of maths up to the age of 18. Right now, just half of all 16 to 19-year-olds study any maths at all. Yet in a world where data is everywhere and statistics underpin every job, letting our children out into that world without those skills is letting our children down. So we need to go further. I am now making numeracy a central objective of our education system. Now, that doesn't have to mean a compulsory A-level in maths for everyone, but we will work with the sector to move towards all children studying some form of maths to 18. Just imagine what greater numeracy will unlock for people. The skills to feel confidence with your finances, to find the best mortgage deal or savings rate. The ability to do your job better and get paid more, and greater self-confidence to navigate a changing world. Improving education is the closest thing to a silver bullet there is. It's the best economic policy, the best social policy, the best moral policy, and that's why it's this government's policy. Now, as we build this better future for our children and grandchildren, I feel a deep responsibility to pass on a health service that will be there for them, just as it was for our parents and grandparents. When I talk about the NHS, I'm not just talking about a prized public service. I'm talking about my family's life calling. My dad was a doctor. I grew up working in my mum's pharmacy. I saw day in, day out the devotion they gave to their patients. And my record demonstrates how important those memories are to me. We've significantly increased funding for health and social care, recruited thousands more doctors and nurses, upgraded more hospitals with cutting-edge technology. But COVID has imposed massive new pressures, and people are waiting too long for the care they need. And we're fixing that, but we need to do more. At a time when we're putting record sums into the NHS and recruiting record numbers of doctors and nurses, healthcare professionals are still unable to deliver the care they want, and patients aren't receiving the care they deserve. So we need to recognise that something has to change. Now, it doesn't mean structural reforms to the NHS. We will always protect the founding principles of an NHS free at the point of use. But what it does mean is an NHS where patients are in control with as much choice as possible, where we're comfortable with the NHS using more independent capacity, if that's what it takes to get patients quicker and better care, where patients can access more information and data, allowing them to make more informed choices and hold services to account, and where we will no longer accept unwarranted variation in performance between trusts, because high-quality healthcare should be there for you wherever you live. And as the NHS works with professions to develop a workforce strategy early this year, I've asked them to consider how we can best support doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals, like pharmacists, to work more flexibly. We all share the same objective when it comes to the NHS: to continue providing high-quality, responsive healthcare for generations to come, and that's what we're going to deliver. Our vision for change will revitalise every aspect of our lives: better jobs, stronger communities, world-class education, an NHS built around patients. But family is something politicians struggle to talk about, because you can all too readily be pilloried for being out of touch, or worse, hostile to those who don't conform to some idealised form. We live in a world today where family can and does take many forms. But whatever your family looks like, it doesn't matter as long as the common bond is love. We shouldn't be shy about it. We cannot not talk about the thing that is most important in most of our lives. Not when the evidence is clear that strong, supportive families make for more stable communities and happier individuals. I wouldn't be where I am today without the love of my family, the kindness they gave me, the sacrifices they made for me, the values they taught me. I learned from them the virtues of hard work and self-improvement, the importance of treating others with respect, the value of service, of how a community relies on people going above and beyond what they are required to do. Today, it is the love of my wife and children that sustains me in the most difficult moments in this job. Family matters. We need to support parents to manage the demands of modern workplaces without weakening the irreplaceable bonds of family life. And we're going to roll out family hubs to offer parents the support they need to raise a child. Because I believe deeply that family, not just government, can help us answer the profound questions we face as a country. When it comes to health, family cares for us when we were sick and old. Family teaches us values in education. When it comes to community, family guides us in right and wrong. And that's why family runs right through our vision of a better future. When I first spoke to you as Prime Minister, I stressed that trust was not given, but earned. I hope that in these first few weeks in the job, I have begun to earn your trust. And I've made 5 promises today to deliver peace of mind. We will halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting times, and stop the boats. But I know this is just the start of what we need to do to build a better Britain together. As well as peace of mind today, this afternoon I've also set out a vision for a better future for our children and grandchildren. Now, we're not going to get there overnight, or even in this Parliament, but this is the journey we are on. And despite all the challenges we face, all the anxieties that people feel, I know we can get there. Others may talk about change. I will deliver it. I won't offer you false hope or quick fixes, but meaningful, lasting change. I want people to feel something that they do not always feel today. A belief that public services work for them. A knowledge that if you work hard in the good times, the state will be there for you during the bad. A hope that the world will be better for their children than it was for them. A sense of belonging in the place they call home. I guarantee that your priorities will be my priorities. I pledge that I will be honest about the challenges we face, and I will take the tough but necessary decisions to ensure our great country achieves its enormous potential. I will only promise what I can deliver, and I will deliver what I promise. Thank you. Thank you. Right, I think we've got a good amount of time to take some questions from the media. Why don't I kick off Chris Mason from the BBC?
Prime Minister, thank you. Chris Mason, BBC News. The health service is under extraordinary pressure right now, and some people watching this afternoon might say, is that it? How soon will things improve in the NHS this winter?
Thanks, Chris. Look, as I acknowledged right at the beginning of the speech, I think that's the thing that people are most worried about. And it's why when I talked about my 5 priorities, the 5 promises that I made to the country, making sure that we reduce waiting times in the NHS was one of them. It's something I've been working on a lot since I was PM, and that's why I want the country to hold me account for delivering it. Now, there are lots of things we are doing. This winter, for example, the most acute pressure we have is in A&E, and we can see that. So what I want the country to know is there are a range of things we're doing that will make a difference. The biggest problem we have is that there are, at the moment, around 13,000 people in hospital beds who ideally should be back in their communities or in social care. And that's what's making sure our hospitals full, and that's what's slowing the flow of people from ambulances into A&E and through. So what are we doing to address that? Well, we've put £500 million into what's called early discharge to help move people into the communities this winter. We're rolling out something called virtual wards, which are where people, for example, who have acute respiratory infections can actually be treated at home with telemedicine or pulse oximeters, which will free up capacity in the NHS. We're rolling out a new fall service so that we can save about 55,000 ambulance call-outs a year by treating people with falls at home. And we need to do a better job on preventative medicine. So many people with undiagnosed high blood pressure who end up ultimately having a cardiac issue that requires an ambulance call-out. So those are just some of the things that we're doing this winter that I am confident will make a difference. We also have a plan in place to get NHS waiting times when it comes to elective surgery down, and that's something that I'm confident we can do. And we will, I believe, in just a few months have practically eliminated waiting times for those waiting a year and a half. We've already eliminated those waiting 2 years, and by next spring I think we'll have eliminated those waiting a year, and that's because we've got a clear plan in place. But what I want the country to know is this is an absolute priority for me. I made 5 promises today, and making sure that people can get the care that they need as quickly as they need it is right there as one of those priorities. The country should hold me to account for delivering it, and I'm confident that we will. Next, Carl Dinnan from ITV.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Just on that point about having fewer people in hospital and not more, paramedics tell us that you might even have to consider pausing elective procedures in order to allow them to get people in the front door, as it were, of hospitals. Isn't this the wrong time to be concentrating on waiting lists when there are queues of ambulances trying to get people who need urgent care into hospital?
Well, Carl, the simple answer is we need to do both, right? And you heard my answer to Chris. There's a range of things we're doing that are going to make the most difference in the short term to A&E and urgent care. And as I said, the most pressing priority we have is to move people into social care and into the communities. That will mean that we can actually get ambulances flowing as fast as we would like and make sure that people are moving into A&E as quickly as we would like them to be seen. But your point on electives actually highlights the issue. That's what we shouldn't do, right? And that's what happened during COVID. We stopped doing elective surgery, right? The amount of elective activity in the NHS was down to about half of what it normally does. So the reason we've got a huge waiting list now is because we're having to catch up with that. And actually one of our initiatives to stop that from happening again is to create what are called elective surgical hubs and community diagnostic centres, where people can get all the scans and the tests they need, and indeed the routine elective surgery like hip replacements and cataracts, away from the acute part of a hospital. Because if you do that, what you do is really increase our ability to treat people, because you don't have doctors constantly disrupted by doing routine appointments and then having to rush to deal with an emergency. That's the model that works really well. We're rolling out 300 community diagnostic centres and elective surgical hubs across the country, and that will allow us to do both. It will allow us to treat our parents, grandparents that are waiting for one of those surgeries that they need, but it will also allow us to treat people in hospitals who need that urgent care. So, my priority is to do both, and I think the plans we've got in place will deliver it, and that's why we put more funding into the NHS. You can't forget that. Just a couple of months ago, the autumn statement, we had to make some very difficult decisions as a government to get our debt under control, to make sure that we control inflation. But in spite of all of those things, we put extra money into the NHS and social care, £14 billion over the next 2 years. Now we need to make sure that we deliver that money in the way that I've described so that people feel the benefit in the care that they and their families receive. We've got a clear plan to do it. My job is to deliver it, and then I want people to hold me for account for it. That's one of the 5 promises I made today. Beth Rigby from Sky.
Thank you. Prime Minister, look, we know to expect a reassuring performance from you, but in the real world, you can't get a train, you can't get a doctor's appointment, nurses are going to food banks, and when you do dial 999, you can't be sure that an ambulance is going to get there in time to save your loved one. That's the reality of Britain in 2023. And now you're here giving people more promises about how you might change the country that they've heard many times before during 13 years of Conservative rule. My question really is, why should the public believe you're any different to any of your predecessors?
Well, Beth, I think the country have seen me perform in the job before through really difficult times. They saw me as Chancellor during COVID. In fact, most of them probably didn't know who I was until I appeared on that press conference on their TV screens. And I'm proud of the record that I have as Chancellor. I think we moved at enormous speed and with competence to actually deliver interventions that made a difference to people's lives, that saved their jobs, protected their businesses. And so people can trust that when I say I'm going to do something, I am going to do it. I think the second thing is, I've been very clear, as I said today, unambiguous. I made 5 very simple promises. The country's priorities are my priorities. I want to be held account for them. There's no ambiguity about them. There's no tricks. People will know whether I'm delivering on these things. And I'm confident that we can. I really am. And you talk about the record. Actually, I'm not going to say the NHS wasn't under any pressure before COVID. Of course it was, but there were places where things were really improving. And you look at ambulance times, for example, Category 2, we were just about at target before COVID hit. And it's undeniable, though, that COVID has had an impact. I talked about the fact that elective surgery was paused during COVID. You can look at the same with cancer referrals. They were down by 1/3 or 2/3 during COVID. And now, obviously, there are far more than normal, right? So that's why that's not performing as well as we would like it to, but it's improving. So, look, COVID has had an impact. It's not an excuse. This is one of my 5 promises. People know what I did for them during COVID as Chancellor, and that's why I'm here today being very clear about what I'm going to deliver for them and the country as Prime Minister. I'm very confident we can do that, but ultimately people will hold me to account for doing so. Right, Olivia Utley from GB News.
to improve?
So I was very clear about the importance of family to me, and actually I think it's good that we talk about family because it's a wonderful thing that we should talk about more. And I specifically talked about part of modern families today is making sure that we can balance between work life and family life, and childcare is obviously an important part of that. The government and I am completely committed to ensuring good availability and affordability and flexibility of childcare. That's what we're always looking to deliver and improve on the offers that we have. There's a consultation that is out at the moment, and we're in the process considering about some reforms, and it wouldn't be right for me to comment on that now. But the fact that I've spent time talking about family hopefully gives you and everyone some confidence that it is important to me, and we want to make sure that we support families in all their forms to have happy, fulfilling lives that are filled with love and nurturing for their children in the same way that I was fortunate to benefit from. Gary Gibbon from Channel 4 News.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Could I just, in the interest of clearing up any ambiguity, clarify which of these pledges are for this year? Halving inflation this year, you said, in line with most forecasts, including the OBR. What about the others? Growing the economy this year? NHS waiting lists falling this year? You said new laws to stop small boats. Well, maybe you could do that this year, but would you stop small boats this year? And could I ask another question? Over recent months, years, actually, Britain's often been compared with Italy and the political and economic crises that happened there. They've occasionally had, to restore calm, a technocrat who's taken over. Are you our technocrat?
It's Gary, on the five promises I made, let me just say, inflation, the plan is very much, and my expectation is that we will be able to halve the rate of inflation by the end of this year. On our path, by the way, to restoring inflation back to where it belongs, which is 2% inflation target that we set the Bank of England. But I'm keen to deliver on the plans that we've set out that will see inflation halving, as I said, by the end of this year. And at the same time, I'd like the economy to be growing by then as well. So those two goals are both for this year. In terms of debt falling, we already have got plans in place to make sure that debt does fall in the medium term. The key is sticking to those and making sure that we have the discipline to do so, because that's not always easy, but it's the right thing to do to secure the future of public services and indeed to combat inflation. And then regard to NHS waiting times, so last year, we practically eliminated people waiting over 2 years because of the plans that we've put in place that increase the amount of elective activity we have that I talked a little bit about. We are on track to eliminate the waits for 1.5 years, practically, by about April of this year. And by spring of next year, we will have practically eliminated those waiting over a year, with the overall waiting list falling. And then lastly, we're keen to introduce legislation as soon as practically possible. Ultimately, Parliament decides how long it takes to pass that legislation. But in all of these things, I've deliberately not put a specific month on each of them, because I don't think that's responsible or the right thing to do with goals that are so complicated, where many of the forces that will impact our ability to hit them are out of my control as well, right? And we've seen that over the past year or two. But what I am being very clear about is what I am prioritising, what I am keen to deliver for the country in terms that I think are easy to understand and unambiguous. I fully expect the country to hold me and the government to account for how much effort we're putting in to working on those priorities, which are their priorities, and then ultimately, how and when we deliver them. But that's why I'm being crystal clear about what we're doing and why. In the interest of time, actually, I think, well, hopefully you can digest the speech in longer time, but I think the country at the moment has a very clear set of priorities that they want their government to focus on. Those are the 5 promises I made. It's about halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting times, and stopping the boats. Those are our 5 immediate priorities. But also today, I sketched out the better future for our children and grandchildren that I want to create. That is not the work of, as I said, 1 year or 1 parliament, but that is the journey that I want our country to go on, and I'm really confident that we can make good progress on that as well. In the interest of trying to get as many of your colleagues in as possible, I'll ask people just to limit themselves to 1 question, if that's okay going forward. Ben Riley-Smith from The Telegraph.
Thank you, Prime Minister. One question with an A and a B, if that's all right. Your plan for growth, you said you wanted to reduce the tax burden. I know you're not going to set the spring budget here, but how likely do you think it is you might be able to reduce the tax burden with the spring budget? And also, you talked about getting people back into work. Could you give me one specific policy idea, new policy idea you're looking at to do that?
Well, I think, Ben, on both of those, I'm not going to preempt what the Chancellor does in the spring budget. I certainly preferred it when I had his job, when the Prime Minister didn't do that, and I'll try and stick by that. But look, I'd repeat what I said in the speech. I think work is really important. It's important not just because it provides financial security. Of course, it does that for us and our families. But I think work provides people with purpose, it provides them with dignity and confidence. It's something to be celebrated and rewarded, which is why, as soon as we are able to, I want to cut taxes on working people. That's something that I think the Chancellor is also aligned on. But right now we've got a set of challenges that we're grappling with, and that's a priority, as I've outlined. And with regard to inactivity, look, there's a range of things that we are looking at that the Chancellor and the Work and Pension Secretary are working on together. And there's, again, with all of these things, there's no one thing that will make the difference. There's probably a range of things. But as I mentioned in the speech, we need to look at how our welfare system is operating, and is it operating in the way that we would like, to make sure that we are supporting, incentivizing people who can be to be in work. And that's the work that we started some of, but clearly there's lots of options that we can look at there, and that's why I mentioned it specifically. But as I said, the budget is a time for these types of things, and the Chancellor will make those announcements in due course. Steve Swinford from The Times.
Prime Minister, you've said that you want to stop the boats. Can I ask, what exactly do you mean by that? Do you mean that by the time of the next election there will be no small boat crossings, or do you mean that there will just be fewer small boat crossings, just to get some definition around that key delivery target of yours?
Yeah. So, Steve, I think ultimately the country will judge, as I said, right? The country will be the judge of whether we as a government are straining every sinew to focus on their priorities and deliver meaningful progress and change on them. Now, when I made a statement in Parliament last month about small boats, I went out of my way to say, look, this is not an easy problem to fix, right? And it's not one that we can fix overnight, and it requires lots of different things to be changed. Now, we've made progress on that already. The new deal with France means that there's 40% more patrols happening in France, which is making a difference to us. The new deal with Albania will enable us to return more illegal migrants who have come here from that country back to where they're from. They accounted for a third of all small boat crossings in the latter part of last year. So that can make a really big difference. But the most important thing we need to do is pass new legislation. And we want to make sure that that new legislation means that if you come here illegally to our country, you will not be able to stay. You will be detained and swiftly removed back to a safe country or your own home, if that's appropriate. That's the type of system that I think makes sense. I think it's in extraordinarily common sense. I think everyone watching will think that's the type of system we should have. But as we've seen already with our Rwanda policy, there are plenty of people who will try and stop that from happening. But what I want to make sure that the country knows is I'm working day and night to deliver that system. And the next step on that journey is to introduce new laws that will allow us to put that system in place. But that is not going to happen overnight. But that is what people will see us working very hard on in the coming weeks and months. Jason Groves from The Mail.
Thanks, PM. Don't you have to resolve the strikes that are going on if you're going to get peace of mind and get the growth that you want? And how are you going to do that without paying people more? Do you think you can legislate your way out of this problem?
Well, thanks, Jason. Look, on strikes, I really want to make sure the country and everyone understands the government's position, and that is that we hugely respect and value the work done by our public sector workers across the board, but obviously nurses are a part of that as well, and a special part of that. And I also want everyone to know that we're very keen on dialogue. The government's door is always open, the Transport Secretary's door, the Health Secretary's door. We're very keen to have constructive, two-way dialogue that's honest, that's open, where we can talk about the challenges everyone's facing and see what we can all do to find a resolution to these strikes. I've always been clear about that, and I wanted to reiterate that today. Now, I've said in this that you'll hear more from the government in the coming days about our approach. But my view is, people should always behave reasonably and fairly, and make sure that what we're doing is centred around what's responsible for the country, what's affordable for the country. I think that's the right dialogue to be having, but I hope we can have that dialogue. But I've also said, much as I celebrate and value the work of unions in our society, they play an important role and people should have the right to strike, that has to be balanced with the right of the British public to be able to go about their lives without suffering completely undue disruption in the way that we've seen recently. And that's why I said we will introduce new legislation that restores that balance and crucially protects people's lives as well as their livelihoods. But you'll hear more from the government in the coming days on that. Ryan Saby, The Sun.
Prime Minister, you recently said that you had 2 years to turn things round. Today you say, judge me. If you don't get your priorities right and get things done, will the public have every right to send you packing?
Well, Ryan, the British public will make their decision, right? Like, my job is to deliver for them, right? And my job is to deliver for them on their priorities. I believe the country has 5 priorities. That's why I've made 5 promises today. Right? 5 very simple things that everyone can understand. Halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists, and stop the boats. 5 promises that I have made, 5 things that my government will focus relentlessly on to make a difference to people's lives. But also, those things are the foundation of the better future that I want to create for our children and grandchildren. Right? They're not the end of my ambition, they're the start of my ambition. And that's why today I've sketched out what that better future looks like. And although we're not going to get there overnight, the things that I talked about are the immediate priorities for us to deliver. I'm confident we can make progress towards that better future as well. And I'm not focused on the politics, I'm not focused on anything else. I'm just focused on delivering on the things that I think are important to people. And that's what I get up to do every day, and that's what the rest of the government does as well. George Parker at the FT.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You said at the outset that you wanted to bring peace of mind. I think you're probably aware that in one area at least you're creating more uncertainty and distress, and that's in the area of revoking or repealing up to 4,000 pieces of EU legislation by the end of the year. 12 organisations from the TUC to the Institute of Directors pleaded with you last year to abandon the end of 2023 deadline. Why don't you give them that assurance today that there won't be this huge upheaval at the end of the year?
Well, George, in my speech I talked about the future economy that we need to build. Right? And it's an economy that's built on innovation. That is the best way for us to raise our growth rate, which is something I know everybody wants to see. And a big part of that is making sure that we do seize the opportunities of Brexit and make sure that our regulations are agile, that they support innovation and do so particularly in the growth industries of the future. And that's why the Chancellor's talked about delivering exactly that, whether it's in AI, whether it's in quantum, whether it's in life sciences or fintech. And I think that's really important, and we are going to deliver that. And if we do, that's how we create jobs in every part of our country. That's how we make sure people's living standards rise. It's how we spread prosperity. It's how we are competitive around the world. So it's an important part of delivering on making sure that the UK is the most innovative place in the world. And we have new opportunities and freedoms to do that, and we are absolutely going to seize them to deliver for the country. Pippa Creer from The Guardian.
Thanks, Prime Minister. You say that nurses and NHS staff are special. All the polls tell us that the public overwhelmingly agrees, but also that they support the strike action being taken by nurses and hospital workers. You also say you're keen on dialogue with the unions. So can you explain why you aren't willing to negotiate their pay? And would you look again at nurses' pensions, bonuses and holiday pay instead? And finally, can you rule out raising NHS staff salaries by just 2% next year, as you're reportedly planning? Thank you.
So Pippa, of course the NHS is special. Right? It's special to me because of the family that I grew up in, but it's special to all of us because of the care it provides us at times when we really need it. And I'm really grateful to our nurses and everyone else in the NHS for the incredible job they do, particularly over the last couple of years, which has been trying for them because of COVID. When it comes to dialogue, I'd repeat what I said before. The door is always open for dialogue. The Health Secretary was out this morning talking to healthcare workers. The Rail Minister is sitting down with transport unions early next week. And we're always, as I said previously, that we want to have good two-way, open, honest conversations. Those have to be rooted in what's reasonable, what's affordable, what's responsible for the country. And I'm keen to have those conversations. There's lots of things that we can talk about. And I'm hopeful. Well, as I said on pay, as conversations need to be based on what is affordable. I think a 19% pay rise is not affordable. I don't think anyone thinks that a 19% pay rise is affordable. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have dialogue, that we shouldn't have conversations. You talked about next year. We're about to start a new process for pay for this year. That's exactly the kind of thing that we should be sitting down and talking to the unions about before everyone submits evidence to that independent process to understand where we're all coming from. And as I say, we'll be setting out more of our plans in this regard in the coming days. Kate McCann, Talk TV.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You've made 5 promises today, but your predecessors also made a promise, a big one, to reform social care, and you were part of the governments that were supposed to deliver on that. They've rowed back. You are accused of doing the same. Now, you've just accepted that one of the biggest challenges the NHS faces is social care. And you've also promised big thinking and no quick fixes, but there's still no plan to deal with the social care problem. So how can people trust you to deliver on 5 more pledges today when you're yet to deliver on this one? And will you resign if you don't?
So, Kate, when you talk about social care, literally just announced billions of pounds more funding for social care on top of the money that I announced as Chancellor. So I don't think anyone can say that we're not prioritising social care. It's never had more investment. And the reason it's so important is because not only do people deserve and need high quality social care, but it is the cause of many of the delays that we're seeing in our urgent care departments and our A&E departments and with ambulances, because as I said, we've got 13,000 people occupying hospital beds that ideally should be back in their communities or in social care settings. So it's a big part of how we actually improve emergency wait times. That's why we've prioritised it. And that's why we have a discharge fund for this winter particularly to do exactly that. It's why we're investing in the social care workforce, something that they've cried out for rightly for years. And now we're doing it. We're introducing a sense of career progression for the first time, high quality certification and qualifications and training, all the things that were not there previously that have led to some of the kind of high or the low retention rates you've seen in the sector, the vacancies. A big part of the reason for that is people not feeling valued. And that's more than just about how much they're paid. It's about all those other things I talked about. The investment we're putting in is going to deliver that, and people are going to see that change. But what you're talking about, I think, is something slightly different, which is about the caps on care. That has been delayed. Yes, because right now we have got an enormous priority, as we're all seeing on our TV screens, and it's important that we fix that priority. And as actually many in local government called on us to do, was to delay those reforms so that we could focus that same money, which by the way is still going into social care, but is now being used to deal with the immediate pressures that we're facing. That's the right thing to do. I think everyone agrees that that's the right thing to do, because we can't do everything. And right now, actually just creating more social care capacity, making sure that our social care workers are properly valued, have the respect that they deserve, the career progression that they want. Those are the right priorities. And not only if we do that will we improve social care in this country, we'll also improve the experience people are having currently with ambulances and A&E, and I'm confident that we can make progress on that. Andy Bell, Channel 5.
Thanks, Prime Minister. To all those people who are worried about the state of the NHS, to all those people working in the NHS who wonder if it can keep going, are you really saying there's no more money? You've had what you're getting. It's been announced there isn't going to be any more. Now you get on with it. Is that what you're saying, in effect, to them?
Well, Andy, I'm saying a couple of things. First of all, thank you for the incredible job they do. And I know that over the past 2 years, we all know that. And also I grew up in an NHS family. So I know how important high quality healthcare is to people. I saw my parents doing it day in, day out for decades. And with regard to resources, it's right that we fund the NHS well, and we are. And that's why, in spite of the difficult decisions we had to make elsewhere, we have found extra money for the NHS and social care. And I think that was recognised by many independent people at the time of the autumn statement that we had prioritised the NHS, that we had listened and put more funding in. Now, a conversation of how that funding is split up and how much should be on pay versus actually having more nurses, or how much should be going on more diagnostic equipment, right? Those are the decisions that we and the NHS are making. That's why we have an independent process on pay, rightly, that the RCN, I think, were one of the people they called for it in the 80s, that there should be an independent pay review body process, and the government has respected those decisions. Right, those are independent processes. They make recommendations to the government, in many cases higher than what the government initially suggested, and higher than what many people in the private sector are receiving, but accepted them in full because that's the right thing to do. But as I said previously to Beth and others and to Pippa, we're always happy to have a dialogue. The door is always open. We're talking about the process for next year. That's exactly the kind of thing we should be sitting down and talking through. And it's not just about pay. I'm sure when you are out and about talking to whether it's ambulance workers or others, there's things about how their job is working that they would like to see improved, right? And that's some of the things that we did with nurses in the past. They wanted to see more support for their professional development. You know what? We instituted a £1,000 training budget, something the RCN really wanted us to do. It wasn't about pay, it was about supporting nurses once they qualified to be upskilled, to learn more and to train more. So we put a £1,000 training budget for every nurse and midwife, right? They wanted nurses' bursaries reintroduced. We deliver that too. It's £5,000 a year for a nurse that's in training. Right, so there's lots of things that are not necessarily paid that are also important, and we should be talking about all these things, and the door is always open to talk about them. Martin Brown, The Express.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You said at the end of your speech you'll make the...
8 questions then in London. He started at 2 o'clock and he's still going. But we'll pull away from that to get some analysis to what he's had to say, particularly those 5 pledges to half inflation, grow the economy, make sure national debt is falling, NHS waiting lists will fall, and passing new laws to stop small boats coming across the channel. Let's get some reaction from our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, first. Tom, what did you have to make for the Prime Minister had to say?
Well, it was an extensive speech. Of course, what Number 10 trailed last night was only a very small part of the overall picture. This was, of course, the first opportunity the Prime Minister had to set out his vision for Britain, if you will, and it covered so many different areas, from public services to the role of the family to the importance of education and upskilling and innovation and growth. It was a wide-ranging speech, and it included, as you rightly introduced this analysis segment with, those 5 clear pledges. However, as we saw in those question and answer sections there, the pledges perhaps aren't as specific as we might like. Firstly, halving inflation. That's what the Bank of England expects to happen in the next 12 months in any case. Perhaps not the most difficult pledge to deliver. If we go over some of the other pledges as well on his list, the economy growing. We heard there, specified in the question and answer session, that meant by the end of this year, the economy in growth. Well, unless we expect a year-long recession, that's likely to happen anyway. Debt falling, we assume this is as a proportion of GDP rather than any other measure. Now, that's expected to happen, I think, in 26-27 in current OBR forecasts. He didn't give a timescale on when he wants this to happen, but I suppose he could argue that if those forecasts are being stuck to, debt will be expected to fall in the next Parliament. I suppose the trickiest one on the list is these NHS waiting lists, because currently, we have this enormous backlog, and that may well get worse depending on how many strikes take place. This backlog may well be added to if there are more days of nurses, of paramedics, of doctors going on strike, and that could be the real sticking point, because, of course, point number 5, the small boats issue, if we read into it, it's not stopping the small boats, as the subtext might imply. It's passing laws to stop small boats. Now, it's very easy to pass a law. The question is, will that law work or not? And we've seen many times beforehand, many laws have been passed, whether it's the Rwanda scheme or anything else, and very often these laws don't actually change things on the ground. And that's not the metric by which this is being judged.
Yeah, which is a good point. Liam Halligan, our business and economics editor, are you impressed by these pledges to grow the economy, half inflation, and make sure national debt is falling?
No, I think, as Tom says, a lot of them are nailed on anyway. It's a bit like saying, oh, I will deliver better weather in June than January. I mean, that's maybe a bit unfair, but there's, as Tom says, almost everybody expects inflation to be about 4 or 5% in the latter half of this year. It's almost an arithmetic inevitability. That's the way inflation numbers work as the figures drop out. This really reminded me of Tony Blair, 94, 95, when I was in Tom's shoes as a political correspondent. Even some of the language, he used the word beacon. That was a sort of typical Blairite word. Blair, of course, unveiled a 5-point pledge card, which he gave to households, delivered to households 18 months before that 1997 general election. It's a little bit unfair because, of course, Rishi Sunak is a lot more experienced now than Tony Blair was then. But it strikes me that this was all about electioneering. This was all about personal political positioning rather than actually tackling the issues that are on the minds now of GB News viewers and listeners, which are paying their energy bills, can their kid buy a house, and how am I going to pay for my credit card when the bill lands on the map?
Yep, good to get some analysis from Liam and from Tom. Thank you. That is it from me. Rishi Sunak says his priorities are your priorities. Do you agree? GBViews at gbnews.uk. It is it's just come up to 1 minute past 3. Patrick Christie is on the way to replace me. In the meantime, let's find out the latest news headlines with Tamsin.
Paul, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 3. The Prime Minister has outlined 5 key promises setting out his government's priorities. Speaking in East London, Rishi Sunak issued a series of pledges, including promising to halve inflation, to tackle the rising cost of living, growing the economy by pledging to create more opportunities across the country, reducing the national debt, which he says will secure the future of public services, cut NHS waiting lists to ensure people can get care quicker, and stopping the small boats, ensuring people are detained and swiftly removed from the country. He said his government had already made steps towards improving the country.
Since I became Prime Minister, we've made progress, stabilised the economy and people's mortgage rates, provided £26 billion of support for the cost of living, invested billions more in schools, the NHS and social care, deepened ties with allies around the world on everything from Ukraine to our collective economic security, continued our unwavering